A millionaire arrives at a gala with his humble receptionist. No one paid attention to her until she walked in. Everyone was left speechless by her transformation. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. The glow of chandeliers illuminated the grand entrance of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where the annual Metropolitan Gala brought together New York's elite. Photographers were everywhere, calling out for celebrities and business magnates to pose against the luxurious backdrop. Among the crowd, Logan Preston, tall, composed, and impeccably dressed in a tailored black tuxedo, answered reporters' questions. He spoke graciously of his charitable plans, the newest expansion of Preston Enterprises, and then casually mentioned that his companion would be arriving shortly. A few curious glances flickered around, wondering if some famous model or actress would emerge by his side. In truth, most expected a face already well known in tabloids. Logan did not elaborate further, leaving them to guess. A sudden glimmer of camera flashes revealed a wave of elegant arrivals. Still, Logan's attention drifted from the event's commotion to a quieter recollection of the preceding days. He remembered that moment in his corporate office, perched high above Manhattan's frenetic streets, when Dorothy Anderson had timidly apologized for spilling coffee on his expensive suit. Instead of anger, Logan felt unexpected curiosity, especially because in the flurry of that mishap, he had noticed a small sketch slip out from Dorothy's leather-bound planner. It was a striking dress design, delicate lines penciled with precision, and a refined sense of style. He recalled how she froze, cheeks aflame, trying to hide the drawing from view. Dorothy had been with Preston Enterprises for 5 years, diligently working as a receptionist on the 42nd floor. She was the kind of person who arrived earlier than anyone else, always with a polite smile and an accommodating tone. Rarely did anyone see beyond her efficient greetings and the neat stack of papers she handled daily. She was from a rural town in Ohio, having lost her parents in a car accident 6 years ago. After their passing, she moved to New York in pursuit of a dream she could scarcely admit out loud. She wanted to be a fashion designer, but the practicalities of survival had overshadowed her ambition, trapping her in a safe but unremarkable role. Her appearance reflected a desire to blend in. She wore her brown hair in a strict bun, her glasses resting low on a narrow nose, and she chose neutral outfits that drew little attention. At 28, Dorothy was slender and of medium height, with soft features that hinted at a depth she rarely revealed. Most colleagues barely noticed her, if at all. If they did, it was only to hand off messages or request assistance. In quiet moments, Dorothy remembered her childhood days in Ohio. She had been an introverted girl who sketched designs in a worn notebook, capturing the shapes of dresses she imagined. After her parents' death, her Aunt Eleanor, her only living relative, had tried convincing her to return home, scolding her for chasing big city pipe dreams. Over time, Dorothy grew used to these conversations, her aunt's disapproval always hovering over her like a looming shadow. Still, she clung to her creative spark in private, though she seldom found the courage to share it with anyone. When Dorothy spilled that cup of coffee, everything changed. While she apologized profusely, Logan noticed her scribbled design. Instead of anger, he expressed genuine interest, startling her. She stammered that it was nothing, just a little sketch. He seemed unconvinced, but allowed her to collect her papers before politely excusing himself. Dorothy spent the rest of that afternoon in a haze of embarrassment, replaying the incident in her mind. She feared, as always, that she had exposed too much of herself. Rumors in the office spread quickly, of course. Melissa Thornhill, the sharp and stylish marketing director and Logan's ex-girlfriend, noticed that Logan had grown strangely thoughtful about the usually invisible receptionist. Melissa and Dorothy exchanged few words, but Dorothy felt the tension whenever they crossed paths. The slow burn of hostility was unspoken, yet palpable. Now, beneath the soaring pillars of the Metropolitan Museum, Logan recalled the urgent telegram he had received just hours earlier from Veronica Sinclair, the high-profile model who was supposed to be his date for the evening. She had backed out for an engagement in Paris, leaving him without a companion. With almost reckless spontaneity, Logan had decided Dorothy might be an ideal substitute. He respected her work ethic, sensed a gentle spirit behind her quiet demeanor, and recognized the unpolished yet remarkable creativity in her drawings. He offered the invitation personally, causing a stir of talk in the office corridors. Many were certain Dorothy would refuse out of sheer terror, but Logan remained resolute. Now, as the paparazzi continued to clamor for glimpses of notable attendees, Logan's gaze trailed toward the museum's broad marble steps. He wondered if Dorothy would find the confidence to walk through those doors. The swirling energy of the gala formed a brilliant tapestry of gowns, suits, and sparkling jewels. Yet for all its glitter, Logan's thoughts lingered on the reticent receptionist who had caught his eye. He waited calmly, prepared to welcome her into this grand event, not knowing that her quiet presence would soon transform his evening and her own life in ways neither could have foreseen. Days before the gala, the usual buzzing of Preston Enterprises had intensified. The staff swapped stories of who might be attending the glittering event, while Dorothy filed paperwork behind her front desk. She listened with a faint smile, assuming she had no place in such circles. Schedules and visitor logs kept her busy as she mentally replayed the mortifying coffee spill incident. Though Logan had seemed kind, she worried he might have privately lost faith in her competence. On a quiet Wednesday afternoon, Dorothy felt a sudden hush in the lobby. Glancing up, she saw Logan approaching with a polite nod. "Dorothy," he said softly, "may I have a moment?" Her heart began pounding, suspecting he wanted to discuss the coffee mishap, or, worse, her drawings. But his request was altogether unexpected. He needed an escort to the Metropolitan Gala, as his original date had cancelled. Would she be willing? At first, Dorothy thought it was a joke. She fiddled anxiously with her glasses and tried to discern any trace of irony. Logan's expression stayed calm and earnest. "I know this is unusual," he said, "but I think you'd make a wonderful companion." Though her cheeks flushed, she managed a tentative nod. Fear gripped her, but her surprise mingled with a ripple of excitement. The powerful CEO who commanded entire boardrooms was asking her, the shy receptionist, to accompany him to the city's most prestigious event. When the news spread, it fell on the office like a lightning bolt. A hush gave way to a storm of murmurs and sidelong glances. "Are we sure this isn't a prank?" a junior associate whispered. Melissa Thornhill, whose posture radiated self-assured elegance, didn't bother to hide her disdain. She strutted over to Dorothy's desk, batting her mascara-laden lashes derisively. "Quite a surprise," she commented icily. One might wonder what inspired Logan's sudden generosity. Dorothy, already struggling to process her conflicting emotions, murmured an awkward response, uncertain how to defend herself. She was hardly prepared for the flurry of attention, let alone Melissa's thinly veiled hostility. Still, the invitation stood. Each night that week, Dorothy returned to her modest apartment in Brooklyn, the clang of the old radiator underscoring her turbulent thoughts. She lived in a small, time-worn building near the subway, content with her humble surroundings because it meant she could save money. The walls of her living room were lined with half-finished sketches and bolts of fabric she had collected over the years. By day, she manned the reception desk. By night, she indulged her secret passion for designing clothes. Her dearest friend, Sarah Martinez, lived just across the hallway. Sarah was a warm-hearted nurse who often brought fresh energy to Dorothy's lonely evenings. When Dorothy confided in her about the invitation, Sarah all but squealed with delight. "You have to accept. This is your chance to see the world you've dreamed about from the sidelines." Dorothy paced the length of her living room, eyes darting between the scattered sketches, her heart torn between excitement and dread. She imagined stepping onto the red carpet, cameras flashing, her worst nightmare. She had never craved the spotlight, yet another part of her felt a longing so sharp it bordered on pain, the chance to belong, if only for one evening, to the glamorous realm she had studied in fashion magazines. Returning to work the next day, Dorothy hoped the chatter might have died down, but each time she passed a cubicle or retrieved mail, she sensed stares and hushed gossip. Melissa seemed determined to flaunt the exclusivity of the event, dropping references to designer outfits and VIP after-parties. Dorothy tried to brush it off, focusing on her duties and ignoring the swirl of rumors. She was used to invisibility, yet now found herself thrust into an unaccustomed spotlight. Late one evening, a delivery arrived at Dorothy's desk. A telegram for Logan from Veronica Sinclair, officially cancelling her plans to attend the gala. Though Dorothy had already heard the news, seeing it in writing felt surreal. Fate, it seemed, had singled her out in the most startling way. She thought about Aunt Eleanor's possible disapproval. Deep down, Dorothy knew exactly what her aunt would say. "You don't belong in that world." But the longer Dorothy sat at her desk, the more she wondered if this was an opportunity to prove otherwise. By the end of the day, she mustered enough courage to text Logan, confirming that she would accept his invitation. A blend of trepidation and exhilaration washed over her. Unknown to both of them, this one decision would reshape her life. As she set her phone aside, Dorothy caught a glimpse of a half-finished gown sketch pinned to the wall. Perhaps, she thought, this was a sign to chase the dreams she had guarded so carefully for so long. Dorothy stepped off the subway in Brooklyn, her nerves frayed. She had agreed to accompany Logan Preston to the gala, but the reality of that commitment loomed like a gathering storm cloud. Outside, the evening chill seeped into her coat as she hurried toward her old brick apartment building. Her thoughts spiraled through a chorus of doubts. What if she embarrassed herself? What if rumors soared? Should she back out while there was still time? The worn steps to her second-floor unit creaked underfoot. Once inside, she flicked on a lamp, revealing her modest living space. A small table, a thrifted couch, and a vintage sewing machine shared the cramped room. Patterns and half-used spools of thread adorned a makeshift workspace in the corner. She began her usual routine, exchanging her office shoes for slippers and switching on a kettle for tea. Except that, tonight, her heart thumped incessantly. As she settled with a mug of chamomile tea, Dorothy's mind drifted to childhood memories of the Ohio farmland. She recalled scribbling dress sketches on the back of old newspapers and dreaming of Manhattan. But those dreams had met harsh reality when her parents died, leaving her clinging to stability above all else. In her new life, she disguised her creative flame behind the safety of a receptionist's desk. She wondered if her parents would have encouraged her, if they would have insisted she find the bravery to show the world her talent. That line of thought brought a bittersweet ache, urging her both forward and back. A knock at the door disrupted her reflections. Sarah Martinez burst inside with a bright laugh, carrying takeout containers. "You still haven't eaten, have you? I figured we could celebrate." Dorothy attempted a wry smile, gesturing at her stack of sketches. "I don't know if celebrate is the right word. I'm petrified, Sarah. This is the Metropolitan Gala. I'm no socialite." Sarah placed the boxes on the small kitchen table and sat. "I think you should do it. And not just for Logan Preston. Do it for you." Didn't you always say you wanted to see the heart of Manhattan's fashion scene? Dorothy sighed, passing Sarah a pair of chopsticks. I did. But it seems so far from my reality. They ate in companionable silence until Sarah noticed the tension in Dorothy's face. You've told me 100 times that you designed to make people feel confident and seen. Maybe it's time you let yourself be seen. Dorothy chewed on that thought, swirling noodles around in the container. She admired how easily Sarah approached life, braving challenges with humor and optimism. Later that night, as Sarah left, Dorothy's phone rang, the screen flashing Aunt Eleanor. She hesitated, knowing the conversation would likely strain her resolve. Taking a deep breath, she answered. Eleanor's voice was curt. I heard rumors you're gallivanting with that fancy boss of yours at a gala. Dorothy tried to explain that it was just one evening. Don't fool yourself, Eleanor snapped. You remember where you come from. These people use you, then toss you aside. Dorothy's hand trembled around the phone. She wanted to protest, to say that Logan wasn't like that, yet she couldn't find the words. After hanging up, Dorothy felt an oppressive weight. She set the phone on the coffee table, scanning the scattered sketches pinned across the walls. Each design felt like a secret piece of her soul, yearning to be acknowledged. She pictured stepping onto the museum's grand steps. In her mind, she was always overshadowed by her own doubts, but an unexpected flicker of defiance rose within her. She recalled Logan's gentle expression as he'd extended the invitation. He hadn't demanded or forced, he'd asked. That counted for something. Still, she wasn't certain she could pull it off. She had no suitable gown or the savings to buy something lavish. Yet in her closet, she kept a trove of fabric saved for the perfect day, a notion that had never seemed real. Had that day finally come? She could nearly envision the lines of a dress formed from satiny red fabric, swirling around her ankles. Was it time to break the wall that had kept her safely hidden? The mug of tea now cold, Dorothy rose and moved to her sewing table. Nervous energy coursed through her. For a moment, she lay her hands on the soft crimson satin she'd been saving, heart pounding at the idea of wearing something she created before the city's most discerning eyes. Uncertainty still haunted her, but so did the spark of possibility. The notion of saying yes to the world, no longer living in the shadows, was both terrifying and electrifying. She realized she stood at a threshold, one that demanded a choice. The protective voice in her head told her to remain in her comfort zone, but a quieter, braver voice whispered that perhaps she was capable of far more. And with that persistent echo of both fear and hope, Dorothy wondered if her time had come to heed the call and step into the light. Sunlight streamed into the 42nd floor reception area of Preston Enterprises the next morning, highlighting Dorothy's anxious expression. She had slept poorly, replaying her aunt's warnings and her own insecurities. Now, as she organized the day's appointments, she overheard hushed conversations about the upcoming gala. Several of her colleagues openly discussed what they would wear if they were in her position. Others speculated on whether she'd show up in something off the rack from a discount store. Dorothy bit her lip, a tight knot in her stomach. Mid-morning, Melissa Thornhill sauntered toward Dorothy's desk with purposeful strides. Dressed in a sleek pencil skirt and a stylish blazer, Melissa embodied a confidence Dorothy could only dream of. She placed a glossy fashion magazine on the counter. "I thought you might like some inspiration," she said sweetly, though her tone was laced with condescension. On a 2-page spread, a model showcased an opulent gown priced well beyond Dorothy's imagination. "This event is quite exclusive," Melissa added, her gaze flicking dismissively over Dorothy's attire. "You wouldn't want to look underdressed." Dorothy forced a polite smile, closing the magazine carefully. "Thank you, Melissa," she replied. She would have liked to disappear beneath the desk, but she stood her ground, determined to remain composed. When Melissa departed, Dorothy noticed that curious eyes still observed her, waiting to see if she could rise to a challenge so different from her usual routine. She kept herself busy with phone calls and scheduling, trying to push self-doubt aside. Before lunch, Logan emerged from a meeting with a group of investors. Noticing Dorothy's tense expression, he stopped by the front desk. "Everything all right?" he asked softly, leaning in so as not to be overheard. Dorothy met his concerned gaze. She hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "Just some pressure about the gala," she admitted. "I'm not used to such attention." He gave a reassuring smile. "Don't worry about anyone else's expectations. Just be yourself, Dorothy. If I wanted a showpiece, I would have asked someone else." His words brought a flicker of comfort. Late in the day, while Dorothy organized a file cabinet, her phone rang. Seeing Aunt Eleanor's name again, she stepped into an empty corridor. Eleanor's voice sounded weary. "I hope you're not disappointed when this fancy party turns into a lesson about who really belongs. I'm worried about you." Dorothy closed her eyes, torn between gratitude for Eleanor's concern and frustration at her relentless negativity. "I'll be careful," she replied, ending the call with a heavy heart. In the hallway, she glimpsed her reflection in a large mirror. She noticed her hair in its usual strict bun, her simple blouse and skirt. There was nothing wrong with her appearance, but she felt the weight of how people saw her. Plain, unremarkable, unimportant. From behind, she heard a gentle voice. "Don't listen to them. You have to trust yourself." It was Sarah who had stopped by for lunch. Dorothy mustered a brave half-smile. That evening, the anxiety trailed her back to her apartment. She thumbed through her meager wardrobe, drab blouses and sensible skirts, not a single piece suitable for the gala's grandeur. Though she had saved for emergencies, she had never considered spending a significant sum on a dress. After a quick meal, she decided to gather courage and visit one of Manhattan's upscale department stores. Perhaps she could just look around, see what might be possible. The store was ablaze with crystal chandeliers and lacquered floors. Rows of glittering evening gowns filled Dorothy with an equal measure of awe and apprehension. A well-groomed sales associate approached, eyeing her plain clothes. "Looking for something special?" Dorothy nodded, feeling smaller with each dismissive glance. The woman led her to a rack of designer dresses with prices that made Dorothy's heart skip. She tried on a gown in the fitting room, its sumptuous fabric flowing across her frame like liquid moonlight. But the price tag was astronomical. When she emerged, the sales associate's false smile made it clear she didn't expect a sale from someone like Dorothy. Flushed with embarrassment, Dorothy returned the dress and rushed out, the stares of other customers following her. On the subway ride home, she fought tears. She felt foolish for stepping into a world that seemed so inaccessible, yet something in her refused to surrender. Arriving back in her apartment, she pulled open a dusty old trunk where she kept her cherished fabrics. Her fingertips brushed against a bolt of crimson satin, the color warm and bold. Maybe she didn't need to buy someone else's vision. Maybe she already had what she required, a spark of creativity and the skill to bring it to life. A late-night drizzle pattered against the window as Dorothy settled onto her worn-out couch. The bolt of crimson satin stretched across her lap. She smoothed the fabric lovingly, recalling how she had scoured discount shops and saved every extra penny to gather quality materials. In that moment, she felt an almost reverent hush. This wasn't just fabric. It was a representation of her hidden dreams. She stood, carefully spreading the satin across the small dining table she rarely used for dining. Her sewing machine waited in the corner, its metallic frame reflecting the dim light of the single floor lamp. If she was going to design a gown for the Metropolitan Gala, now was the time. She shivered slightly at the enormity of the task, but amid her doubts, a faint thrill tugged at her. She had spent years longing to showcase her skill. Here was her chance. Before she could fully commit, her phone buzzed. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "How are you holding up?" Sarah asked, voice warm. Dorothy explained she was thinking of making her own dress. "Finally!" Sarah cheered. "It's about time the world saw what you can do." Dorothy's apprehension mingled with a surge of inspiration. She confessed her fears, the deadline, her job, the negativity swirling around her. But Sarah simply declared, "You can handle it. I'll help however I can." Ending the call, Dorothy looked around at her cozy but cluttered space. There were no fancy cutting tables or mannequins beyond the single dress form propped in a corner. Yet she had everything she truly needed: a sewing machine, good fabric, and a well of determination. Gathering a measuring tape and chalk, she began sketching the final design directly onto the satin, her breath catching with each fluid line. She envisioned a silhouette that would accentuate elegance without overwhelming her frame. The color was bold, a deep, dramatic red, yet she wanted the design to remain timeless, paying homage to the city's architectural shapes through subtle pleats. Hours passed in a flurry of chalk lines, pins, and carefully guided stitches. A sense of calm came over Dorothy, her mind focused on each seam. The repetitive hum of the sewing machine lulled her into a meditative rhythm. She recalled the day Logan discovered her sketches. Her face burned with the memory, but it also spurred her on. If he believed in her enough to invite her to the gala, maybe she could believe in herself too. At around 2 in the morning, Dorothy paused, exhaustion tugging at her eyes. The garment was far from complete, but it was taking shape. She smiled softly, a mixture of pride and uncertainty. She set the dress form aside, pinned with the beginnings of the gown, then collapsed into bed. Sleep brought vivid dreams of swirling red fabric beneath brilliant museum lights. For the first time, excitement overshadowed her anxieties. The next day at work, Dorothy navigated questions from curious colleagues. Some approached her with genuine kindness, while others, like Melissa, peppered her with passive-aggressive remarks about pulling off a miracle. Instead of responding, Dorothy focused on her tasks, quietly holding on to the secret that she was creating her own masterpiece. Whenever she felt uncertain, she reminded herself that behind her shy demeanor lay years of unspoken dedication. By the end of the day, Logan asked if she wanted a ride home, noticing how tired she looked. Dorothy politely declined, explaining she had some errands. In truth, she craved the familiar comfort of the subway ride, where she could let her mind drift among strangers, mentally reviewing the next steps for her gown. She also wanted to avoid any further gossip. Logan respected her wishes, offering a gentle smile that melted a bit of her tension. Later that evening, Dorothy found Sarah waiting outside her apartment door. "Hope you don't mind," Sarah said, lifting a small bag of groceries. "Thought you might need fuel for the night shift." They chatted about the progress of the dress, referencing her sketches scattered around. Sarah promised to help with fittings if needed. Dorothy felt bolstered by her friend's unfaltering support. Through the wee hours, Dorothy sewed the final panels, painstakingly crafting each pleat. She imagined stepping out of the car at the Metropolitan Museum, her heart pounding, yet wearing a design entirely her own. She dared to think of the look on Melissa's face, and of the possibility that other attendees might admire her creation. More importantly, she imagined how it would feel to stand beside Logan, no longer just an overlooked receptionist, but a woman who had found her voice in thread and fabric. By the time the sun peeked through her window, Dorothy had reached a pivotal conclusion. There was no turning back. She would attend the gala with Logan. She would wear the red satin gown that had taken shape from her deepest dreams. In that choice, she found a glimmer of a new identity, someone brave enough to risk judgment in the pursuit of something meaningful. She gently ran her hands over the nearly finished dress, sensing that her life was about to change in ways she had never dared imagine. Night had fallen by the time Dorothy found herself standing outside the ground-floor apartment of Eleanor Chen, a woman she had only nodded to in passing for years. The hallway lighting was faint, casting soft shadows across the peeling wallpaper. Dorothy gripped the bundle of crimson fabric in her arms, her heart pounding with uncertainty. Could this elderly neighbor truly offer the guidance she needed for finishing the dress? When she finally summoned the courage to knock, the door opened a mere crack. Eleanor Chen peered out, her sharp eyes studying Dorothy from behind silver-rimmed glasses. She was petite, barely reaching Dorothy's shoulder, and her stark white hair was coiled into a low bun. Dorothy introduced herself, babbling an apology for the intrusion at such a late hour. She stumbled over a request for help in refining her gown, explaining she had heard rumors that Mrs. Chen once worked in haute couture. Eleanor paused, arching a brow. Then she unlatched the chain and motioned for Dorothy to step inside. The apartment was much as Dorothy had imagined. Tidy, with vintage furnishings and an assortment of framed photographs on the walls. A faint scent of jasmine tea lingered. Despite the cramped quarters, Dorothy noticed a clear space along one wall where a sewing machine of an older model sat perched atop a sturdy wooden table. Spools of thread were neatly organized by color. It was a silent testament to the life Mrs. Chen had once led. "So," Eleanor said, eyeing the scarlet dress that Dorothy gingerly unfurled, "you made this yourself?" Dorothy nodded, explaining the concept and the upcoming gala. She mentioned the importance of finishing touches, stitching the hem with invisible precision, structuring the bodice so it wouldn't lose shape, and, most crucially, ensuring it would fit perfectly despite her long hours at the office. Eleanor listened, her expression impassive. Then, with surprising grace, she reached for the dress and ran her fingertips along the seams. The older woman's demeanor shifted subtly. Respect for the garment glimmered in her eyes. She gestured to a chair. "Sit, let me see how it looks on you." Dorothy hesitated, then stepped behind a cloth partition to slip into the half-finished dress. Emerging, she felt a blush creeping across her cheeks. It wasn't quite flattering yet. The raw edges still exposed in places. Eleanor circled her slowly. "The foundation is good," she murmured, "but your posture, stand tall." "Shoulders back," Dorothy obeyed, feeling an odd sense of being both scrutinized and supported. Eleanor began adjusting pins, her old but nimble fingers guiding the satin into a more precise drape. "I see what you're trying to do," she said. "Architectural pleats to evoke skyscrapers. Yes." Dorothy's eyes widened. She had never uttered those words to anyone. "How did you guess?" Eleanor gave a hint of a smile. "When you spend a lifetime making gowns for catwalks in Hong Kong, you learn to read a designer's intent. You're clearly inspired by city lines." As they worked, Dorothy learned more about Eleanor's story. Born in Shanghai, she had moved to Hong Kong in her 20s, building a career in high-end fashion. She designed for prominent socialites and film stars, but never broke into the Western market. Fear of failing on a grander stage, she admitted, had held her back. Eventually, she left that world behind to move closer to family in the United States. "I let opportunities slip through my fingers," she said softly, the clattering of pins in a small dish punctuating her words. "Don't make the same mistake. If the gala is your big moment, seize it with courage." Night after night, Dorothy returned to Eleanor's apartment, sometimes after a grueling day at the office. Together, they hand-stitched delicate details and reinforced seams. Over cups of fragrant jasmine tea, Eleanor offered more than just technical knowledge. She spoke of the grit and self-belief it took to survive the fashion world. Dorothy listened intently, her confidence flickering like a newly lit candle. As they huddled over the satin's sheen, both women found a connection bridging their differences in age and background. It wasn't always smooth. Eleanor could be blunt. If a line wasn't precise or a stitch looked sloppy, she'd tap Dorothy's shoulder with a seam ripper and insist she do it again. Dorothy swallowed her pride, determined to learn. In truth, she welcomed the honest critique. Each lesson felt like a rung on a ladder to self-assurance. One evening, as Dorothy prepared to leave, Eleanor surprised her by pressing a small box into her hands. Inside lay a delicate brooch fashioned from rubies and filigree gold, glinting in the dim light. "Wear this," Eleanor said simply. "It belonged to my mother. In our family, it symbolizes courage. You'll need it." Emotion knotted in Dorothy's throat. She thanked Eleanor, realizing this mentorship wasn't just about a dress, it was about rediscovering a lost sense of conviction. When Dorothy returned upstairs, her heart was lighter. She had found an unexpected mentor and ally in Eleanor Chen. With each new stitch, she felt herself stepping more fully into the role she'd always been too timid to claim, that of a designer, an artist with something meaningful to show the world. Though doubt still flitted around her like anxious moths, she sensed a growing determination that, for once, might outshine the fear. With just days left before the Metropolitan Gala, Dorothy found herself juggling her day job and long evenings at Eleanor's apartment. While she kept her work demeanor calm and professional, her mind raced with images of finishing touches, ornate beading, careful pleats, the ideal length for the crimson gown. The faint circles beneath her eyes hinted at too many late nights, but she pressed on, driven by a sense of purpose she had never felt so keenly before. Sarah, ever the supportive friend, stopped by Dorothy's apartment with grocery bags filled with fresh vegetables and ready-to-cook meals. She insisted Dorothy eat healthier food to keep her energy up. "You're running on adrenaline," Sarah chided gently as she helped chop bell peppers. "I've never seen you this determined about anything. Promise me you'll take care of yourself." Dorothy mustered a weary smile, touched by her friend's concern. Meanwhile, at Preston Enterprises, the chatter about the gala only intensified. Colleagues who had once overlooked Dorothy now watched her with thinly veiled curiosity. Some openly speculated about whether she would pull off a fashion miracle. Others joked about how she might appear in a frumpy old bridesmaid dress. Dorothy tried not to let the comments rattle her. Every evening, she reminded herself that her real work, the gown, awaited her at home. On Thursday, Logan approached her desk quietly. "You look tired," he remarked. Concern laced his tone. "I'm fine," she replied with a small laugh. "Just a lot on my plate." She didn't dare mention the specifics of her late-night sewing sessions, but Logan seemed to sense she was pushing herself. He invited her for a quick coffee in the company lounge, an unusual gesture that raised more than a few eyebrows among passers-by. In the lounge, Logan confided that he was facing pressure from certain board members to impress potential investors at the gala. "They see it as a networking extravaganza," he said, stirring his coffee. "But I want to make sure it remains a celebration of creativity, not just money. That's what events like this should be about." Dorothy listened, noting how different his perspective was from what she'd assumed of most CEOs. She appreciated how he spoke with genuine conviction. It gave her hope that maybe the glitz and glamour weren't entirely hollow. That night, after work, Dorothy received a phone call from her Aunt Eleanor. She let it ring twice before answering, bracing for criticism. "So you're still going to this gala, I hear?" Aunt Eleanor stated. "Yes," Dorothy answered, trying to sound confident. She offered a quick summary of her preparations, leaving out the detail of her homemade dress. Eleanor paused, then said softly, "Just be safe. Remember your roots." It wasn't exactly an endorsement, but it felt less like a reprimand. Dorothy's heart squeezed with conflicting emotions. Perhaps her aunt was starting to realize how important this was. On the eve of the gala, Dorothy went to see Eleanor Chen for the final fitting. The older woman examined each seam with a critical eye, tugging gently at the skirt's hem, testing the zipper's sturdiness. Finally, she nodded. "It's ready." Dorothy ran her hands over the smooth satin, hardly believing it was her own handiwork. "Thank you," she whispered to Eleanor, her voice trembling with gratitude. Eleanor handed her a small spool of emergency thread and a pack of pins. "For last-minute fixes," she said. "Luck favors the prepared." As Dorothy was leaving, Eleanor spoke again. "I never had the courage to go bigger, to push myself when I was your age. I regret that." A hint of sadness colored her words. "You have a chance to step onto a bigger stage. Don't let fear hold you back. Promise me." Dorothy swallowed hard, nodding. She felt a surge of affection for this woman who had become more than just a neighbor. She was now a guiding presence, a testament to the power of second chances. Back in her own apartment, Dorothy did a practice run of her hairstyle and makeup, guided by Sarah's enthusiastic tips. "Try soft waves," Sarah suggested, helping to remove the pins that always held Dorothy's hair in a strict bun. Dorothy was startled by her own reflection in the mirror, a gentler, more assured version of herself. Though still nervous, she found herself smiling, realizing that the metamorphosis was more than skin deep. When she finally crawled into bed, the dress hung neatly on her closet door, illuminated by the soft glow of a single lamp. She stared at it, imagining the next day when she would enter the Metropolitan Museum at Logan's side. No matter how the evening turned out, whether she dazzled or stumbled, she knew she had already taken a life-altering step by daring to pursue her calling. The quiet in her apartment felt charged with promise, as though an unspoken goodbye was being said to the old Dorothy, who'd once believed she was destined to remain invisible. On the night of the gala, Dorothy paced her apartment as the clock ticked closer to the appointed hour. She wore a simple robe, while Sarah made final adjustments to her hair, which now flowed in loose waves around her shoulders. Dorothy's nerves buzzed with an intensity that made her stomach churn. Would this gown hold up under the glare of paparazzi and the scrutiny of fashion insiders? She forced herself to take a deep breath, remembering Eleanor's calm voice. "Present yourself with dignity. The rest will follow." A faint honk outside announced the arrival of Logan's driver, a man named James Wilson, whom Dorothy had often seen in passing. She slipped into the gown, the crimson satin hugging her figure just as she and Eleanor had meticulously planned. Sarah, brimming with excitement, helped secure the hidden zipper and handed Dorothy a small clutch. Within minutes, Dorothy stood by her apartment door, heart pounding like a racehorse. "You look incredible," Sarah murmured, squeezing her friend's hand. "Go show them who you are." Dorothy rode the creaky elevator down to the lobby, her senses heightened. Each beep of the elevator felt like a countdown to an entirely new world. When the doors opened, James waited by the sleek black car, tipping his cap politely. He was an older man with kind eyes and a measured air about him. "Good evening, Miss Anderson," he said, opening the car door. Dorothy thanked him, stepping into the plush interior, still feeling as though this was an out-of-body experience. During the drive, she kept checking her reflection in the tinted window, not quite believing she looked so different. Hair loose, lips colored with a subtle red lipstick, and that bold gown she had painstakingly crafted. She smoothed the skirt repeatedly, ensuring no wrinkles formed. James, noticing her nerves, spoke gently. "I've driven Mr. Preston for nearly 20 years. Believe me, he has a keen eye for genuine people, not just flashy appearances. He sees something in you." Dorothy blinked, touched by the sincerity of his words. "Thank you," she said softly. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, and she found comfort in his grandfatherly warmth. He told her a story about Logan's early days, when he'd first taken over Preston Enterprises. "I've seen him stand up for people who nobody else noticed," James mused. "He doesn't talk about it much, but he's done a lot of good behind the scenes." When they finally neared the Metropolitan Museum, Dorothy's breath caught at the sight of a dazzling crowd. Cameras flashed like lightning against the grand facade. The red carpet stretched across the museum's entrance, lined with spectators hoping to glimpse celebrities and influential figures. A swirl of designer gowns and sharp tuxedos moved in a slow procession up the steps. Dorothy's heartbeat thundered in her ears as she imagined stepping out into all that brilliance. James stopped the car along the curb, where a uniformed attendant opened the door. "Best of luck," he murmured. Dorothy stepped out, feeling the subtle cling of the satin against her body. The spring air was mild, but adrenaline sent a chill through her. Photographers craned their necks, searching for big names. For a split second, Dorothy's instinct was to shrink away, but she remembered Eleanor's advice. Stand tall. She scanned the ornate entrance for Logan. He was at the top of the steps, speaking to a journalist. Spotting her, he smiled, a relieved, radiant smile that seemed to convey admiration and reassurance all at once. Dorothy made her way up, the sounds around her falling into a hushed echo. A few cameras flashed in her direction, curious at first but not entirely sure who she was. When she finally reached Logan's side, he offered his arm gallantly. "Dorothy," he said in a low voice, "you look stunning." A slow warmth flooded her cheeks. "Thank you," she replied, glancing shyly at him. The cameras drew nearer now, as reporters realized Logan Preston's much-anticipated companion had arrived. A handful of them tried to call out her name, mispronouncing or simply referring to her as Logan's guest. Dorothy felt a wave of vulnerability, but Logan steadied her, guiding her through the entrance. Inside the museum, the opulence took Dorothy's breath away. Glistening chandeliers lit the marble floors, and grand archways led to galleries filled with priceless art. Attendees mingled in carefully curated clusters, sipping champagne and discussing everything from art to corporate deals. Dorothy felt as though she'd stepped into a high society dream. She gripped Logan's arm tighter as they navigated the crowd, her senses overwhelmed by sparkling gowns, tuxedos, and the buzz of sophisticated conversation. Though Dorothy had imagined this moment for days, nothing prepared her for the reality. She was crossing a threshold into a sphere of wealth and influence she had only observed from afar. Yet, as she took her first steps into the gala, she couldn't ignore a flicker of pride. She wore her own creation, each stitch representing a piece of her journey. Whatever happened next, praise, dismissal, or even outright criticism, she had already begun to claim her place, and that alone felt monumental. The vaulted ceilings of the Metropolitan Museum soared above Dorothy like a cathedral, the grandeur nearly dizzying. Chandeliers, suspended on ornate chains, reflected in the polished floors so that each step was punctuated by gentle gleams of light. Voices merged into a gentle roar, laughter, polite exclamations, the clink of champagne flutes. Dorothy inhaled slowly, trying to quell her racing heart. Logan led her through the throng, offering introductions when appropriate. Dorothy's natural reserve gripped her at first. She found it challenging to speak more than a few polite words to each new face. Her own voice sounded strange in her ears, elevated by nerves. Yet she noticed that behind Logan's composed demeanor lay a subtle tension, as if tonight carried a weight of expectations beyond just socializing. Investors, Board members, potential clients, they all seemed eager to corner him for a moment of his time. Nevertheless, he consistently circled back to check on Dorothy, ensuring she never felt abandoned in the crowd. At one point, Dorothy glimpsed Melissa Thornhill gliding across the room, radiating confidence in a fitted designer gown. Melissa's eyes locked on Dorothy with a flash of surprise, perhaps even irritation, upon realizing how elegantly Dorothy had presented herself. In that brief exchange, Dorothy felt both a flutter of triumph and a pang of anxiety. She recalled Melissa's earlier snide remarks and wondered what fresh criticisms might be whispered tonight. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne glasses. Logan handed one to Dorothy, who sipped carefully to steady her nerves. The bubbles tickled her nose, the taste both unfamiliar and sophisticated. She was absorbed in the spectacle: polished marble steps, lavish floral arrangements, live music drifting from a string quartet. Already, a few people cast curious glances at her gown, no doubt attempting to place the designer. Dorothy braced herself, half expecting someone to inquire about the label, but she remained anonymous for the moment. As they reached the heart of the event, she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. A charming man with salt and pepper hair introduced himself as Richard Hamilton, a friend of Logan's and the creative director at a prominent fashion magazine. His smile was warm. "Logan told me he was bringing someone special this evening," he said, examining Dorothy with an inquisitive gleam in his eye. "I must say, that dress is spectacular. Who designed it?" Dorothy's pulse spiked. She parted her lips, momentarily speechless. Before she could muster a response, Logan chimed in, "Actually, Dorothy created it herself." Surprise flickered across Richard's face. "I'm impressed. Tell me more about your inspiration." Dorothy swallowed hard, summoning a shred of confidence. She explained, in modest terms, how she'd wanted to honor the city's architecture and its daring lines. Richard nodded, his curiosity clearly piqued. Before they could delve deeper, the swirl of the gala carried Richard away to greet someone else. Dorothy exhaled, her shoulders relaxing. She glanced at Logan, who offered an encouraging smile. "You did great," he murmured. "I'd be delighted to keep bragging about your talent." She managed a shy laugh. "I'll try not to faint if more people ask." They wandered further into a gallery where the main exhibits were displayed. Classical sculptures stood like silent observers to the evening's glitz. As Dorothy admired the artwork, a slender, willowy woman approached. Her sleek dress shimmered under the spotlights, and her hair was styled in a dramatic updo. "Olivia Bennet," she introduced herself, extending a manicured hand. "I'm a designer, though you may not recognize me." Dorothy recognized the name. Olivia Bennet was celebrated for launching a line that melded contemporary cuts with bohemian flair. The brand was often featured in magazines for being both stylish and philanthropic. Logan made the connection quickly. "Dorothy here made her own gown," he said. Olivia's eyes lit with genuine interest. "It's absolutely exquisite," she enthused. "I always love discovering new talent." Dorothy offered a humble thank you, her cheeks warming under Olivia's praise. The accomplished designer leaned in, lowering her voice. "Take my advice. Meet the right people, but never lose your own signature. In this industry, authenticity is gold." Their conversation was cut short by the arrival of another group wanting Olivia's attention. Yet before departing, Olivia pressed a business card into Dorothy's hand, giving her a knowing smile. Dorothy stared at the glossy card, her heart skipping a beat. Even if nothing came of it, receiving a personal contact from such a notable figure felt surreal. Moments later, a wave of camera flashes drew Dorothy's attention to the museum's colossal staircase, where a famous actress posed in a shimmering silver gown. The crowd parted for the star, reporters vying for quotes. Dorothy watched, both fascinated and slightly overwhelmed. She stood in a world of high fashion, swirling champagne and influential connections. But amidst the splendor, she felt a seed of hope begin to sprout, a sense that she might earn her place here through her own merit, rather than hide behind the anonymity she'd always found so comfortable. Despite the luminous ambiance and the thrill of meeting new people, Dorothy felt a subtle thread of apprehension tug at her. She realized how easily one could become lost or overshadowed in a crowd of such distinguished attendees. She and Logan parted briefly so he could meet several investors who had requested a private chat. Left on her own, Dorothy glided through the galleries, grateful that her gown allowed her to blend in rather than stick out as an obvious outsider. Yet she was far from invisible. A sudden voice caught her attention. "You there, in red!" Dorothy turned, finding herself face to face with Victoria Montgomery, a woman of around 65 with sleek silver hair styled in a chic bob. Her name was legendary in the fashion world. She had been an editor at a leading magazine for decades before retiring. Stories circulated about her sharp tongue, and Dorothy braced herself. Victoria's sharp eyes roved over Dorothy's dress. She murmured. "I admire the structure in your bodice. It reminds me of early Donna Karan meets a modern architectural twist. Who's your mentor?" Dorothy's heart fluttered. I designed it myself," she managed, forcing herself not to shrink under Victoria's formidable gaze. After a moment, Victoria's austere face softened. "Well, dear, you clearly have an eye. Keep cultivating it." Dorothy nearly sighed in relief. She introduced herself properly, and Victoria nodded, her stance relaxing. "Word is spreading about a newcomer wearing a self-made gown that's turning heads. I suspect you're the one." Before Dorothy could reply, another familiar face joined them, Richard Hamilton from earlier. He greeted Victoria with the warmth of an old acquaintance. "Have you met Dorothy?" he asked, smiling. "She's the talent behind that red dress." Victoria arched an eyebrow. "We were just discussing it. She has potential, Richard." Dorothy found herself flushed with a mix of pride and disbelief. Two industry veterans were praising her, and part of her felt giddy, while another part fretted about living up to the hype. Richard tapped Dorothy's arm gently. "I was looking for you," he said. "Logan stepped away for a moment, and I wanted to introduce you to someone." He motioned to a petite woman with dark hair twisted into a neat chignon. "Dorothy, meet Anna Chen. She's an investor specializing in emerging designers." Anna extended a hand, her smile kind. "Richard's been telling me about your dress. I'd love to hear more." At first, Dorothy's words tumbled out awkwardly, describing how she had learned to sew from a patchwork of self-taught methods and the recent guidance of an elderly seamstress in her building. Anna listened intently, undeterred by Dorothy's hesitant start. "Passion is more important than having a fancy design school on your resume," Anna said. "If your work speaks to people, that's what matters." Their conversation flowed easily, surprising Dorothy with how naturally it felt to discuss her creative process. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of Melissa Thornhill hovering at the edge of her vision, wearing a perturbed expression. Dorothy sensed Melissa's disapproval and wondered if jealousy played a role. She tried to ignore it, focusing on Anna's interest in hearing about her sources of inspiration. Midway through their exchange, Dorothy excused herself to get some fresh air. She slipped through a pair of large glass doors, leading to a terrace overlooking a glittering skyline. The muffled sound of the Gala receded. Standing there, she breathed in the crisp night air, the distant hum of city traffic, a comforting reminder of the world beyond this glamorous cocoon. A moment later, she heard footsteps behind her. It was Logan, looking relieved to have escaped the investors. "I needed a break," he admitted, removing his jacket and draping it over a nearby chair. "How are you holding up?" Dorothy met his gaze. the city lights casting a gentle glow on his features. She felt a surge of gratitude for his invitation. "I'm overwhelmed, but in a good way," she said, her voice quiet. "People are actually interested in my work." "It's unbelievable," Logan smiled. "I'm not surprised. You've always had something special about you, Dorothy." His tone was casual, yet the sincerity in his eyes made her pulse quicken. She looked away shyly, focusing on the glimmering skyline. For a moment, they stood side by side, the energy of the city pulsing below. She thought about how drastically her life had changed in just a matter of days. Then, as if summoned by fate, Melissa burst onto the terrace. "Logan!" she called, injecting herself into their bubble of quiet. "I've been looking for you." She barely acknowledged Dorothy, keeping her gaze fixed on Logan. Dorothy felt a flicker of annoyance, but attempted a polite smile. However, Melissa abruptly turned to Dorothy, her voice laced with saccharine hostility. "Your dress is lovely," she said, her smile clearly forced. "You must be thrilled to have all this attention." Logan's jaw tightened slightly, sensing the undertone of condescension. Dorothy, choosing to remain composed, replied calmly, "I am, thank you." She could see the resentment swirling behind Melissa's eyes. But before any further verbal jabs could be exchanged, Richard called out from the doorway, beckoning them inside for a group photograph. As Dorothy walked back into the glowing expanse of the gala, she felt a surprising sense of confidence bloom. She had garnered interest from significant players in the fashion world. She had allies like Richard and Anna, and even the formidable Victoria Montgomery seemed to approve. The challenges weren't over. She could feel them brimming beneath the surface. But with every passing moment, it became harder to deny that she was no longer the invisible receptionist she once was. And while she couldn't articulate it fully yet, she sensed that a new chapter of her life had already begun. Dorothy felt as if the world had turned into a kaleidoscope of shifting color and sound around her. The gala thrummed with music and conversation, and every corridor of the Metropolitan Museum seemed filled with glamorous guests. She had been drifting between small groups of people, answering polite questions about her dress, still a source of buzz among a few curious onlookers. Occasionally, she caught sight of Melissa Thornhill's cool stare, but she tried to focus on more encouraging faces, like Richard Hamilton's friendly smile or Anna Chen's genuine interest in her designs. Before long, Dorothy spotted Melissa again, standing with a circle of sophisticated patrons. From their body language, crossed arms, narrowed eyes, Dorothy sensed that she was the unfortunate topic of their conversation. She was about to slip away when one of the patrons beckoned her over, presumably to include her in the dialogue. Trying to be gracious, Dorothy approached, offering the group a shy but cordial smile. "Dorothy," Melissa said in a tone that dripped with faux warmth, "we were just discussing your sudden entrance into the fashion scene tonight. Such a surprise for everyone. Aren't you overwhelmed?" A few people in the group chuckled quietly, though it was unclear whether they sympathized or mocked. Dorothy's heart pounded, but she forced herself to stand tall. "It's certainly been a whirlwind," she answered, "but I'm grateful for all the supportive people I've met." Melissa's gaze slid over Dorothy's gown, then flicked back up with a practiced air of dismissal. "I suppose we must all start somewhere. But do be careful," she said, lifting a champagne flute from a passing tray. "In these circles, one misstep can overshadow any amount of raw talent. Reputation is everything." Dorothy noticed the subtle way Melissa's well-manicured nails drummed the glass, a threat disguised as friendly advice. An uncomfortable hush settled over the group. One of the patrons, a middle-aged socialite in a shimmering teal gown, eyed Dorothy with a hint of pity. "Fashion is a fierce world, dear," she remarked. "It might be best not to dream too big too soon." Another awkward laugh rippled through them, and Dorothy felt heat rise in her cheeks. Though Dorothy desperately wished to respond calmly, her nerves got the better of her. She mumbled an apology and pivoted, nearly bumping into a waiter who was circulating with fresh drinks. The sudden movement caused the waiter to stumble, and a splash of champagne flew from his tray. In a split second, droplets scattered across the teal gown of the startled socialite. A gasp shot through the group as the woman recoiled, her expression horrified. For a moment, everything froze. Dorothy's mind raced. She knew this was the kind of blunder that Melissa would seize upon. Sure enough, Melissa pressed a hand to her mouth, feigning shock. "Oh my, Dorothy!" "Careless, aren't we?" A few bystanders craned their necks to see what the commotion was about, and camera flashes glinted in the distance. Words of apology tumbled from Dorothy's lips. But the socialite was already stepping back, dabbing futilely at the champagne stains with a linen napkin. "She ruined my dress," the woman muttered. "What was she doing, dancing around like that?" The sting of humiliation bit deep. Dorothy felt as though all eyes were pinned on her, judging her for stepping outside her rightful place. Melissa placed a hand on Dorothy's shoulder, but her grip was anything but reassuring. Leaning in, she whispered, "Logan might have brought you tonight, but don't assume that elevates your status. Mistakes like these show exactly who you are, out of your depth." Her voice, low and merciless, cut Dorothy to the core. Emotion welled up inside, an overpowering mixture of shame, anger, and regret. Feeling tears threaten to spill, Dorothy spun around and fled. She pushed her way through the crowd, ignoring the perplexed glances and quiet murmurs. Her pace quickened until she found herself in a dimly lit corridor off to the side of the main gala halls. A sign pointed to a restroom. Slipping through the door, she locked herself in a stall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The cool silence of the bathroom pressed around her, broken only by the faint echoes of the gala's music through the walls. She fumbled for a tissue, dabbing at her damp cheeks while scolding herself for being so emotional. Why couldn't she have handled Melissa's remarks better? Why did she freeze in the face of ridicule? She thought of Aunt Eleanor's dire warnings, all those times she insisted Dorothy didn't belong in this world of glitz and power. Could her aunt have been right? A few minutes passed before Dorothy emerged from the stall. She patted her face with cold water at the marble sink, forcing herself to breathe evenly. Her reflection in the mirror looked shaken, eyes puffy, confidence rattled, but beneath the vulnerability remained a resilient spark. The scarlet dress still gleamed under the overhead lights. She had come too far to let a single misstep drive her back into obscurity. With trembling resolve, Dorothy decided she would compose herself and rejoin the gala. One humiliation would not erase her dreams. Dorothy pressed her hands against the edge of the sink, trying to steady her breath. The restroom, spacious and elegantly furnished, felt like a sanctuary compared to the charged air of the gala outside. She could still hear distant music and laughter, a bittersweet reminder of the world she hoped to inhabit. Yet at this moment, she wished only to vanish. Her fiasco with the spilled champagne was sure to fuel gossip, and Melissa's scorn still rang in her ears. She froze when the door opened. Expecting perhaps a swarm of curious socialites, she was startled to see Victoria Montgomery enter alone, the legendary former fashion editor who had offered Dorothy guarded praise earlier. Victoria glanced around, then let her gaze settle on Dorothy. "I was hoping I might find you here," she said matter-of-factly, approaching the sink next to Dorothy and fiddling with the faucet. "Seems the night has thrown you off balance." Dorothy swallowed. She wasn't sure whether Victoria's presence would result in further reproach or unexpected empathy. I'm so embarrassed," Dorothy admitted softly, eyes downcast. "I spilled champagne on a guest, and Melissa." "She made it abundantly clear I don't belong," Victoria produced a silk handkerchief from her small clutch. Nonsense. Everyone has had an awkward moment at a gala, though not everyone has a Melissa Thornhill to amplify it. She extended the handkerchief, a silent invitation for Dorothy to wipe her teary eyes more gracefully. I've seen your dress up close, and that alone suggests you've earned a right to be here. Don't let others decide that for you. Their reflections in the mirror presented an unexpected tableau. Victoria, seasoned and poised, standing beside Dorothy in her radiant crimson gown, shoulders drooping from hurt feelings. A wave of relief washed over Dorothy at the older woman's words. "Thank you," she murmured, carefully dabbing beneath her eyes. "It's been an overwhelming night." Victoria leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "I've watched people like Melissa for decades," she said. "They operate on fear, fear of losing influence, fear of being overshadowed. Now, I'm not saying you should stoop to her level, but you mustn't let her intimidate you." Dorothy sighed, collecting herself. The overhead lighting highlighted the soft sheen of her dress, a reminder of the labor and artistry she'd poured into it. She recalled the countless hours at Eleanor Chen's apartment, every seam lovingly stitched. She steadied her voice. "You're right," she said quietly. "I've worked too hard to let this unravel now." A half-smile ghosted across Victoria's lips. "I'm planning to introduce you to the editor-in-chief of Couture Today magazine before the night is over. That is, if you're up to it." Dorothy's eyes widened in disbelief. She had read every issue of Couture Today that she could get her hands on, absorbing trends and craftsmanship as best she could from afar. I don't know what to say," Dorothy stammered. Victoria, however, seemed content with Dorothy's wide-eyed reaction. "A simple yes will suffice," she replied. Dorothy's shoulders relaxed, and she exhaled slowly. The transformation she had hoped for all night wasn't simply about wearing a beautiful gown. It was about finding the courage to stand firm in a setting that felt both alluring and treacherous. A renewed sense of confidence coursed through her. She set down the handkerchief, patted the final traces of tears from her cheeks, and squared her posture. "Thank you," Dorothy repeated more decisively this time. "I won't hide. I'll see this night through." Victoria nodded, appearing satisfied. "Good, I'll give you a few minutes. Meet me in the main hall once you're ready." With that, she departed as briskly as she had arrived, leaving Dorothy alone under the gilded sconces. Glancing in the mirror, Dorothy carefully smoothed her hair, letting the loose waves frame her face. Her lipstick had faded slightly, so she retrieved a small tube from her clutch and reapplied a subtle coat of soft red. The act felt symbolic, a quiet declaration that she refused to be subdued. She even adjusted the intricate pleats at her waist, ensuring the dress's silhouette remained flawless. Then her fingers drifted to the ruby brooch Eleanor had given her, pinned discreetly near her collar. She recalled Eleanor's words, "You'll need courage." This was her moment to prove she had it. By the time Dorothy emerged from the restroom, a new certainty grounded her steps. Yes, she had stumbled, publicly and humiliatingly, but so what? The dream she carried was worth enduring discomfort for. She thought of the parents she had lost in Ohio, of Aunt Eleanor's misgivings, of the unrelenting voice that once told her she wasn't made for this world. Tonight, with mentors both unexpected, like Victoria, and steadfast, like Eleanor Chen, Dorothy realized she was no longer that timid receptionist, convinced she belonged on the sidelines. She was stepping into the center of her own narrative, one thread, one stitch, one courageous choice at a time. Her gaze swept across the marble corridor as she headed back toward the gala's buzzing main hall. She felt sure of at least one thing. No matter what else happened tonight, praise, criticism, or further mishaps, she would face it with her head high. And in that certainty lay her true transformation, a blossoming belief that she belonged in this place, among these people, exactly as she was. When Dorothy re-entered the gala, she found that the lively ambiance had only grown more electric. The music swelled through the grand hall, and clusters of guests engaged in animated discussions about art, philanthropy, and naturally, business dealings. She scanned the crowd, looking for Logan Preston's familiar figure. Instead, she caught sight of Richard Hamilton chatting with a group by the bar, and just beyond him, she glimpsed Victoria Montgomery speaking with a distinguished man who Dorothy guessed might be from Couture Today. That meeting would be crucial for her budding ambition. Yet as Dorothy weaved through the throng, something else tugged at her. She had promised Logan she'd be his companion, and they had barely spent any time together since the initial flurry of introductions. Distantly, she recalled how he'd confided his hope that this gala would be about more than just corporate strategy, that it could still honor creativity. She worried that if she rushed off to chase fashion contacts, she might leave Logan feeling abandoned or disrespected. Amid these circling thoughts, she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. Turning, she found Olivia Bennett, the established designer who had shown early interest in her dress. Olivia looked genuinely pleased to see her. "Dorothy, I'm so glad I found you. I've been telling a few people about your design. You must meet them." Dorothy's pulse quickened. The chance to connect with industry insiders was exactly the kind of opportunity she had dreamt of. Yet she hesitated, scanning the crowd once more for Logan. "Thank you so much, Olivia," Dorothy began, nibbling her lip. "I'd love to be introduced, but Her eyes landed on Logan in the distance, engaged in an earnest conversation with two older men in impeccable suits. He looked slightly beleaguered, as though carrying the weight of unspoken negotiations. Something about his posture made Dorothy's heart pinch with concern. She wondered if he needed her support, or if he was dealing with a crisis. Then again, perhaps that was simply the price of being a CEO at an event saturated with investors. Sensing Dorothy's conflict, Olivia placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Go on. Do what you need to do. I'll be here for another hour or so, and I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk more." Dorothy smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Olivia. I appreciate your understanding." Pivoting gracefully, Dorothy made her way toward Logan, weaving between elegantly clad guests. As she approached, she caught fragments of a tense discussion. One man spoke in hushed but fervent tones about withdrawing support if certain conditions weren't met. Logan's jaw was set firm, though he nodded politely in response. The second man, arms folded, looked impatient. Dorothy paused, uncertain whether to interrupt. The conversation's dynamic seemed to revolve around financial deals or philanthropic endeavors, perhaps the very project Logan had mentioned earlier. Logan noticed Dorothy hovering at the edge of their circle. He quickly excused himself from the men and stepped closer, relief softening his features. "Dorothy," he said in a low voice, "you're a sight for sore eyes right now." She offered a concerned glance at the pair of investors behind him. "Is everything all right?" He exhaled, a flicker of exhaustion passing over his face. "Just a small crisis in our corporate outreach program. Some investors want immediate returns and are threatening to pull out of a charitable project I've been championing." Dorothy felt a surge of empathy. She understood how crucial those philanthropic ventures were to Logan, who rarely boasted about them, but evidently cared deeply. She placed a tentative hand on his arm, ignoring the watchful gaze of the two men. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Is there anything I can do?" He hesitated, clearly not wanting to drag her into corporate politics, yet he seemed genuinely comforted by her presence. "I appreciate that, but no. This is just part of the job." Dorothy nodded slowly, aware that the moral dilemma she faced was broader than just her personal ambition. She had an obligation, moral, if not strictly professional, to stand by Logan, who had given her the chance to step into this extraordinary evening. But she also had a once-in-a-lifetime opening to meet influential fashion figures, the gateway to her true calling. Before she could overthink it, Dorothy spotted Victoria Montgomery waving discreetly from across the hall, as though beckoning Dorothy to hurry. Dorothy's stomach flipped. If she missed this introduction, who knew if another would come her way? Meanwhile, Logan glanced over his shoulder, noticing the restless investors. A silent question hung between them. Which direction would Dorothy choose? Her mind spun. She remembered the sketches piled in her Brooklyn apartment, the nights spent dreaming of a breakthrough in the fashion world. She also remembered how Logan had given her respect and an opportunity when no one else had. Torn between loyalty to the man who believed in her and the drive to finally claim her rightful place as a designer, Dorothy realized there was no easy solution. Any choice risked sacrificing something she valued. Gathering her courage, Dorothy met Logan's eyes. I might need a few minutes, she said, voice trembling with conflicted emotion. He studied her face, understanding dawning. Go, he murmured, a half-smile forming. We'll talk later. The relief in his tone was tinged with sadness, as though he knew he was sending her away to chase her destiny, a destiny that could one day pull them apart. Dorothy swiftly crossed the gleaming marble floor to meet Victoria Montgomery, who was in conversation with a tall woman wearing a sleek black suit and clutching a leather-bound portfolio. The woman turned at Dorothy's arrival, and Victoria seized the moment to make introductions. Dorothy, this is Miranda Fletcher, editor-in-chief of Couture Today, she announced with a knowing gleam in her eye. Miranda extended her hand, her grip firm but polite. I've heard impressive things about your gown, Miranda said, studying Dorothy's attire with an expert eye. Mind if I take a closer look? Dorothy nodded, feeling her heart flutter. She angled herself, allowing Miranda to observe the structured bodice and subtle pleats. Miranda traced the garment's silhouette in the air with a poised finger. Gorgeous lines, reminiscent of an urban skyline, if I'm not mistaken. Dorothy flushed with quiet pride. That was my inspiration, yes, Manhattan's architecture. Miranda lifted an appraising eyebrow. You've succeeded in capturing that essence. How long have you been designing? Dorothy, still somewhat breathless, explained her background, self-taught, aided recently by a retired seamstress juggling long work days. Miranda listened intently, then exchanged a pointed glance with Victoria. We may have to discuss a feature. There's real talent here. The mention of a possible feature in Couture Today felt surreal. Dorothy struggled to maintain composure, though her excitement soared. This was the chance she had yearned for, the reason she toiled secretly on her sketches each night. She was about to respond with her gratitude when a commotion rippled through the crowd behind them. Voices grew louder, and Dorothy sensed a wave of discomfort spreading across the hall. A glance in that direction revealed Melissa Thornhill, her expression alarmed, speaking urgently to several guests. Dorothy's stomach tightened. Was another crisis brewing? Almost on cue, Melissa's eyes fixed on Dorothy, narrowing with triumphant malice. Dorothy's pulse quickened. She turned back to Miranda, trying to hold on to the moment. But Miranda's attention, too, was drawn toward the disturbance. Suddenly, Melissa strode over, flanked by a small group of onlookers. I'm sorry to interrupt, she addressed Miranda with feigned politeness, but I thought you should know. Dorothy here has been less than honest. I've just discovered something quite concerning. The hush that fell was like a thunderclap. Dorothy's heart lurched. She glanced between Melissa and the onlookers, uncertain what dreadful accusation might be coming. Miranda frowned, crossing her arms. Concerning in what way? Melissa donned a sympathetic expression, though the malice in her eyes belied any genuine concern. It appears Dorothy used company resources, fabrics, perhaps even time on the clock, to create this dress without approval. She produced a slip of paper from her clutch. I have a record of fabric orders from a Preston Enterprises account. Red satin was delivered a few months back, yet no official project was associated with it. Dorothy's mind raced. She had never taken materials from the company. Every scrap of cloth for her dress she'd bought herself, meticulously scrounging her meager savings. Where was Melissa getting these records? With shaky conviction, Dorothy shook her head. That's not true. I purchased my own fabrics, Melissa cut in, voice rising enough to gather a small crowd. Then how do you explain this order receipt bearing your signature? She thrust the paper forward. Dorothy's eyes scanned the document. The signature was indeed her name scrawled at the bottom, but she recognized neither the writing nor the details. Her breath caught in her throat. This was sabotage. She looked to Victoria and Miranda, who both seemed taken aback, uncertain what to believe. Rage and humiliation warred in Dorothy's chest. She glanced around for Logan, but he was nowhere in sight. Was he still entangled with the investors? Summoning her courage, Dorothy faced Melissa. This isn't my signature, she said, voice trembling. You forged it. Melissa let out a dramatic gasp. Why would I do that? You were always so quiet. Maybe I never saw your true colors. Whispers among the growing circle swelled. Some guests seemed skeptical of Melissa's claims, while others arched their eyebrows at Dorothy, as if waiting for a convincing explanation. Miranda looked troubled, glancing at Victoria for guidance. This is a serious allegation, Ms. Thornhill, she stated carefully, and an unfortunate moment to air such accusations. Melissa seized the moral high ground. I only bring it up now because I don't want Ms. Anderson's potential career to be built on a lie. She must clear her name if she can. Dorothy felt as though she were watching her future unravel in real time. If people believed she had stolen materials from Preston Enterprises, her credibility would be shattered. Yet she lacked any proof on hand to refute the forged document. She thought of Aunt Eleanor's repeated warnings about the cutthroat nature of city life. Was Melissa truly so vindictive? A swirl of panic rose in Dorothy's chest. Struggling to steady herself, she locked her gaze on Miranda. Please, she implored, I can prove I bought my own fabric. I just need a chance. Miranda, to her credit, offered a slight nod, though uncertainty clouded her expression. We should resolve this discreetly, away from prying eyes, she suggested. Melissa, however, made no move to retreat. She seemed to relish the spectacle, aware of every whispered remark from onlookers who had gathered. Dorothy realized that, in Melissa's mind, this was the perfect strike. A public humiliation to overshadow Dorothy's rising star. In that moment, Dorothy steeled herself. She might be cornered, but she refused to collapse without a fight. She exhaled slowly, reminding herself that the truth, at least, was on her side. Onlookers parted as Dorothy and Melissa stood face to face in a tense standoff. Camera flashes occasionally lit the edges of the scene, capturing the drama unfolding in real time. Miranda Fletcher and Victoria Montgomery hovered close by, forming a fragile barrier against the murmuring crowd. Dorothy could practically feel the stakes rising. If Melissa's forgery went unchallenged, her reputation would be permanently tainted. And yet Dorothy refused to let panic consume her. A murmur from behind broke the standstill. "What on earth is going on?" Logan's voice echoed across the marble hall. He strode forward, flanked by two men, likely the investors he'd been courting. Concern furrowed his brow as he surveyed the circle of witnesses. Melissa's face twitched, briefly betraying alarm, before she offered him a saccharine smile. "Logan, thank goodness," We have a serious issue. Dorothy has apparently been using Preston Enterprises resources without authorization. The men behind Logan exchanged glances, worried that the company they might invest in was embroiled in scandal. Dorothy felt the weight of their judgment, but also the flicker of hope that Logan's presence brought. She turned to him, voice trembling but determined. "I never use company materials, Logan. She's lying." Melissa thrust the receipt forward with theatrical flair. "Then how do you explain this official order? Your name is all over it." Logan took the paper, scanning it closely. His expression hardened as he studied the signature. Then he looked up, focusing on Dorothy's distressed face. "Dorothy, I know your handwriting from all the documents you sign at the front desk," he said slowly. "This isn't it." Relief flooded Dorothy's chest, though the confrontation wasn't over yet. She saw Melissa's hand twitch nervously at Logan's calm assertion. Perhaps she hadn't anticipated that he'd recognize the forgery so quickly. One of the investors cleared his throat. "If the signature is indeed forged, that raises another concern. Who forged it and why?" Melissa's cheeks colored under the scrutiny, but she held onto her composure. "I'm only passing along the information I received," she insisted, raising her chin. "It came through an anonymous tip. I simply felt it was my duty to investigate." Victoria Montgomery cast a skeptical glance in Melissa's direction, her lips pressed in disapproval. "Sounds like a rather orchestrated tip, if you ask me," she remarked dryly. Sensing that Melissa was losing her foothold, Dorothy raised her chin as well, determined to reclaim her voice. "I have receipts for every yard of fabric used in this dress. They're at my apartment, along with the leftover scraps. If anyone wants to see proof, I'll show it to them." Miranda Fletcher seized that moment to speak. "In the fashion world, authenticity matters. If you can show me your purchase receipts for this red satin, I'll put any rumors to rest in my column." Her tone was firm, and Dorothy recognized she was being offered both a challenge and an opportunity. She nodded eagerly. I will." A brief hush fell. Melissa's eyes flicked around the circle, perhaps seeking an ally. Finding none, she mustered an indignant sigh. "Well, if that's the case, I suppose there's nothing more to say," she declared, though her tone suggested she'd find another angle to sow doubt. With forced politeness, she added, "I'm glad we could clear this up." Then she pivoted and slipped away, likely to avoid further suspicion. The tension broke, and guests began to disperse, muttering about the commotion. Logan let out a slow breath, handing the forged receipt to one of his assistants. "Find out who processed this order," he instructed quietly. "Something doesn't add up." The assistant nodded and left to make calls. Dorothy leaned heavily against a nearby sculpture pedestal, relief coursing through her limbs now that the accusation had been neutralized, at least momentarily. Victoria placed a reassuring hand on Dorothy's shoulder. "I'm sure Mrs. Fletcher will be in touch. Don't fret over Melissa's schemes. People like her always reveal their true colors in time." Dorothy managed a small, grateful smile. "Thank you. I appreciate your faith in me." Miranda gave a curt but encouraging nod. "Send me that proof, Dorothy, and let's talk soon about a piece in Couture Today." With that, she departed, leaving Dorothy feeling both rattled and elated. Logan stepped closer, concern etched into his features. "Are you okay?" She exhaled shakily. "I think so. It's just... I never imagined I'd be defending myself against a conspiracy in front of half the city's fashion scene." He slipped a comforting hand around her arm. "I'm sorry you had to go through that. It's my fault for letting Melissa remain in a position of influence even after our breakup. She thrives on control, As the gala's music resumed and conversations picked up again, Dorothy realized that in a strange way, Melissa's sabotage had turned into an unexpected revelation. People had rallied around Dorothy, recognized the authenticity of her design, and witnessed Logan's unequivocal trust in her character. Despite the humiliating confrontation, Dorothy emerged stronger. The path forward still had obstacles, but for the first time she sensed the spark of real possibility, a future in fashion that she could claim as her own. With the confrontation resolved for the moment, Dorothy found herself standing at the foot of the grand staircase, gazing out over the gala. It was almost as though the evening had a renewed vibrancy. Where earlier she had felt overshadowed by powerful figures, now she felt a collective sense of curiosity and cautious respect directed her way. The fiasco with Melissa had, in a peculiar twist, shined a brighter spotlight on Dorothy's talent and resilience. Just then, Richard Hamilton appeared by her side, a beaming smile on his face. "My goodness, Dorothy, that was quite a show," he teased. "I'd heard rumors, but I'm glad to see you're still here, standing proud." She flushed slightly, recalling how easily her night could have ended in disgrace. "I'm grateful for the support," she murmured. Richard nodded, glancing around. "I suspect you have more champions than you think. Not everyone is fooled by petty theatrics." He guided her toward a group of people that included Anna Chen, the fashion investor Dorothy had met earlier. Anna greeted Dorothy warmly. "I heard about the confrontation," she said, "and I'm relieved the truth prevailed, for now, at least." Dorothy thanked her, feeling the tension in her shoulders finally ease. Anna patted Dorothy's arm. "If you ever consider starting your own line, come talk to me. I invest in promising up-and-comers." Her heart soared. A direct offer from someone like Anna was validation beyond her wildest dreams. But Dorothy tempered her excitement, recalling her modest financial situation and her job at Preston Enterprises, which, until tonight, had felt like her only safety net. "I appreciate that," she said sincerely. "I might just take you up on it in the future." In a swirl of excitement, Dorothy was ushered from one conversation to another. Words like potential collaboration, possible mentorship, and partnership opportunity floated in the air, though all of it felt somewhat unreal. She remembered the telegram from Veronica Sinclair that had set this night in motion. Had that cancellation never happened, Dorothy would be at her reception desk the next morning, an anonymous figure. Now, she was on the brink of a professional breakthrough. Even as she reveled in the possibilities, Dorothy couldn't ignore the undercurrent of tension still rippling through the museum. She noticed Logan standing with Melissa near the entrance to a quieter side gallery. Their body language was guarded, an earnest conversation unfolding. Dorothy observed from afar, her heart twisting slightly at the worry etched on Logan's face. The ghosts of their shared corporate environment hovered around them, and Dorothy found herself torn. She wanted to talk to Logan, thank him for defending her, yet also felt uncertain about intruding on what looked like a private argument. Eventually, Melissa stalked off, leaving Logan alone. Dorothy seized the moment to approach him. "Hey," she said softly. He gave her a weary smile. "Did you hear from Miranda Fletcher yet?" Dorothy nodded. "She wants me to send proof of my fabric purchases so she can quell any lingering doubts." Logan exhaled, relief evident in his posture. "That's good. I'll have my team investigate that bogus receipt. If Melissa was behind this, we'll find out." They moved toward a quieter alcove where a magnificent painting hung in dramatic light. Dorothy lowered her voice. "I'm sorry your night became so complicated. You wanted a peaceful gala, and I ended up causing a spectacle." Logan shook his head. "You didn't cause anything. Melissa's the one throwing wrenches." But he paused, studying Dorothy's face. I won't pretend I'm not a little proud of how you stood your ground. I've never seen you so sure of yourself. Her chest swelled with a mixture of gratitude and emotion. Thank you. For everything. Their gazes locked, and for a moment, the swirl of the gala seemed to recede into the background. Despite all the chaos, Dorothy felt an undeniable current between them, something warmer, more personal than she'd ever acknowledged at the office. The weight of unspoken possibilities lingered in the hush. A burst of applause from the main hall broke the moment, and they turned to see a small ceremony commencing. A benefactor awarding a donation to the museum. Logan offered Dorothy his arm, and they returned to the central space just as a photographer snapped pictures of the awarding official and the museum director. The flash reminded Dorothy of her own fleeting fame tonight. She caught glimpses of guests whispering and pointing, "There's the receptionist designer." Quite the story. In that charged atmosphere, Dorothy felt the night's crescendo reach its peak. Her talent recognized, her relationship with Logan shifting, and her dreams no longer confined to the corners of her Brooklyn apartment. Yet a myriad of questions remained. Could she truly juggle a design career while staying loyal to the man who had first noticed her potential? Would Melissa retreat or strike again, determined to undermine Dorothy's success? Though none of these answers were clear, Dorothy recognized a deep surge of resolve forming within her. Tonight had ignited a spark she refused to let die. She recalled something Eleanor Chen had said about seizing the moment. For the first time, Dorothy believed she could shape her destiny in the high-stakes world of Manhattan's fashion elite. And as the gala began to wind down, she felt certain that the real battle, proving herself beyond a single evening, was just beginning. As the gala edged toward its grand finale, Dorothy could feel the electricity in the air. Conversations hummed more intensely, and guests moved from one lavish gallery to another, savoring the last moments of the night. The recent drama with Melissa's forgery attempt had not gone unnoticed. Whispers circulated among the crowd, some in Dorothy's favor, others uncertain. Still, she carried herself with a quiet assurance. She had Logan's backing, and Miranda Fletcher from Couture Today had signaled genuine interest in her design. It felt as though everything hovered on a precipice, waiting for a final push. Just as Dorothy stepped away from a conversation with Anna Chen about possibly showcasing her designs in a smaller upcoming event, she spotted movement at the far side of the expansive marble hall. Melissa Thornhill was marching purposefully toward her, chin set in defiance. Dorothy's chest constricted at the sight. She caught Logan's concerned gaze across the room. He looked as though he wanted to intervene, but the crowd was dense, and Melissa reached Dorothy first. "What do you want?" Dorothy asked, voice kept steady by sheer will. They stood in the center of a ring of onlookers. Several pairs of eyes flicked their way, sensing tension. The light from a magnificent chandelier bathed them both, casting sharp reflections on the glossy floor. Melissa's lips curved into a chilly smile. "I want some honesty, Dorothy," she said, voice dripping with condescension. "You've spun quite a fairy tale, haven't you? From dowdy receptionist to star of the evening. But we both know you don't belong here." Dorothy drew a breath, forcing calm. "I've proven the dress is mine. The fabrication about me stealing materials was exposed. So what are you after now?" Before Melissa could respond, Logan finally broke through the crowd, stepping up beside Dorothy. He faced Melissa with cool composure. "If you have any integrity, Melissa, you'll leave it at that. Your attempts to smear Dorothy have failed." His voice was firm, each word weighted. A flicker of apprehension crossed Melissa's eyes. Suddenly, cameras flashed. A few reporters, sensing a story, hovered on the periphery. Melissa, perhaps fueled by the attention or cornered by her own lies, let her composure slip. "I gave this company my best years," she hissed, voice quivering with anger as she turned to Logan. "And you hardly blinked an eye when we ended things. Now you focus all your attention on her." She flung an accusatory hand toward Dorothy. Logan's jaw tightened. "That's enough," he warned. But Melissa, clearly past the point of caution, lunged. She reached for the ornate ruby brooch pinned at Dorothy's collar, determined to rip it away. Dorothy gasped, instinctively trying to shield her neckline. In the scuffle, the delicate satin of her gown tore with a sharp rip, the sound as devastating as broken glass. A collective gasp reverberated through the crowd. Time seemed to slow as Dorothy felt the cool air against her shoulder where the satin had parted. Melissa staggered back, brooch clutched in her hand, its golden filigree glinting beneath the chandelier light. Logan quickly intervened, seizing Melissa's wrist before she could do further damage. Security personnel, alerted by the commotion, rushed forward. Chaos erupted, gasps, camera flashes, shocked whispers. Dorothy's heart hammered as she looked down at her beloved creation. The tear, while not enormous, was painfully visible along the seam near her shoulder. Outrage and heartbreak mingled in her chest. She had poured countless hours into this dress, weaving her hopes and insecurities into every stitch. In a single spiteful moment, Melissa had tried to destroy it. "Let go of me!" Melissa shrieked, jerking away from Logan's grip. The security guards flanked her, quietly insisting she follow them outside. She struggled, her anger morphing into desperation. Realizing the cameras were capturing every second, she flung the brooch to the floor with a clang that resonated through the hush. Then, head held high, she stormed off under escort, leaving the onlookers stunned. For a beat, Dorothy stood frozen, breath coming in shallow bursts. Then, like a reflex, she crouched down to retrieve the ruby brooch. Its clasp was bent, but the rubies remained intact. Shaken guests murmured words of sympathy or simply stared, unsure how to react. One of the cameras snapped repeatedly, capturing Dorothy's distress. She straightened, eyes brimming with tears she refused to let fall. Logan, visibly shaken, placed a hand on her uninjured shoulder. "Dorothy, I'm so sorry." He said no more, yet his remorse was palpable, remorse that he hadn't anticipated Melissa's outburst, that he'd unknowingly allowed her near enough to inflict harm. All at once, Dorothy remembered Eleanor Chen's wise counsel and the small kit of emergency supplies. Thread, pins, fabric patches. It was in her tiny clutch, carried more out of habit than expectation. Trembling, she opened the bag, withdrew a few items, and inhaled slowly. She might not repair the dress to perfection on the spot, but she could at least keep it from unraveling further. In a poignant hush, she carefully pinned the torn section together, her cheeks flushing at the onlookers. But as she worked, a wave of pride and defiance washed over her. She wasn't a hapless victim. She was a designer who understood how to mend what had been broken. When she finished, a modest but neat fix kept the gown's shape intact. The ruby brooch fastened safely on the other side. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then more sure, as if everyone recognized the symbolic triumph in Dorothy's calm, capable hands. Sensing that the worst had passed, Dorothy exhaled a long, trembling breath. She looked at Logan, who nodded, admiration clear in his eyes. Despite the violence of the confrontation, Dorothy realized something profound. Her dress, like her own resolve, might be scarred, but it was not destroyed. And in this harrowing test, she had proven to herself and to the world that no act of malice could unravel her newfound strength. A half-hour later, security had quietly escorted Melissa Thornhill from the Metropolitan Museum, and a wave of hushed talk spread among the guests who lingered. Many were uncertain about the details of what had happened. only that a violent scene had erupted and a beloved garment was torn. Dorothy, though shaken, stood at the center of a swirl of support. Familiar faces, Richard Hamilton, Olivia Bennet, Anna Chen, approached with concern, offering words of comfort or small gestures of solidarity. "Are you all right?" Olivia asked, voice low, as they stepped aside from the main thoroughfare. Dorothy nodded, eyes drifting to the pinned section on her shoulder. "Better than my dress," she quipped, trying to muster a light tone. She forced a smile. "At least the tear isn't too large." In truth, she was more emotionally frayed than she wanted to admit. The night had brought dizzying highs, recognition from top fashion figures, and now this painful climax, with Melissa. Richard, standing with them, offered a sympathetic nod. "Despite the drama, people have been talking about you non-stop. Photographers want to feature your work in post-gala reports. And there's growing buzz online about the receptionist in red." Dorothy's eyes widened. Receptionist in red? She wasn't sure whether to laugh or cringe at the moniker. Olivia quickly added, "It's meant admiringly, I promise. They're fascinated that someone from behind a corporate desk could design something so exquisite." Their supportive words lifted Dorothy's spirits. Still, she couldn't ignore the deep exhaustion coursing through her. She hadn't anticipated that walking into this glittering world would demand so much emotional endurance. Turning, she noticed Logan speaking quietly with an older man who wore a museum badge pinned to his lapel. The man nodded curtly, then departed, leaving Logan to cross the floor toward Dorothy. "They've asked if we'd like to depart early, away from the cameras," Logan said, his voice calm but tinged with remorse. "I told them it's your call. This is your night." Dorothy's gaze drifted around the gallery. Though some guests still roamed, the energy had thinned. The initial extravagance of the gala was winding down. She exhaled slowly, recalling how earlier she'd been so determined to seize every moment of this opportunity, yet the chaos had soured the festive air. "I think I'm ready to go," she admitted softly. Logan nodded. "Then let's not stay any longer. There's nothing more you need to prove." He glanced meaningfully at the pinned section of her gown. Dorothy felt a rush of gratitude at his understanding. She craved the quiet of her apartment, the chance to unravel the evening's events in solitude. Her lips curved into a small smile. "Thank you." They made their way through the museum's corridors, the hush broken only by distant voices echoing off marble. As they approached the exit, flashes burst once more. Photographers stationed by the entrance, eager for a final shot of the dramatic couple who had inadvertently become headline material. Dorothy's shoulders tensed, but Logan wrapped a protective arm around her, guiding her past the persistent shouts of, "Look here," and "Dorothy, how do you feel?" She kept her chin raised, remembering her resolve not to shrink from the spotlight. James, Logan's longtime driver, waited outside with the car door open. Dorothy sank into the leather seat, relief flooding her. Logan followed, closing the door to muffle the cacophony of camera shutters. The city's lights streamed past the windows as James navigated Manhattan's late-night traffic. Dorothy let the hum of the engine and the distant honking of cars lull her overwrought mind. At a stoplight, she glimpsed her reflection in the window, tousled hair, a faint tear in her dress, and eyes that glimmered with fatigue. After a moment, Logan spoke. "I'm sorry that tonight ended this way." Dorothy turned, meeting his apologetic gaze. "It's not your fault," she said. "Melissa chose her path, but I can't lie. I'm rattled." Logan's hand brushed hers in a gentle reassurance. "I know. I wish I could have prevented it. If there's anything you need..." His voice trailed off, offering an unspoken promise. Dorothy could only nod, her emotions swirling too quickly for words. The car pulled up to her Brooklyn apartment, Logan insisted on walking her to the building's front door. They stood on the weathered stoop, city lights gleaming from a distant skyline. Dorothy's throat tightened with conflicting feelings. "Thank you for everything," she said softly. "I still can't believe how much has changed in a single night." Logan studied her face, his expression conveying a depth of affection that went beyond mere gratitude. "You changed it," he murmured. "You stepped into the light. No one forced you. I'm proud of you." A warm flutter stirred in Dorothy's chest. She thought of how she had been overlooked for so long, hiding her talent out of fear of judgment. This night, as tumultuous as it had been, had shown her that she could stand tall. She reached for the doorknob, turning it slowly. "Good night, Logan," she whispered, stepping inside. He remained on the stoop, offering a soft smile as the door closed between them. When Dorothy climbed the stairs to her apartment, she paused in the dim hallway to let the reality settle around her. She was no longer just the invisible receptionist who fantasized about fashion in secret. She was now, undeniably, a figure who had been seen, even photographed, by the city's elite. Yes, her gown was ripped, her heart still pounding from confrontation. But she'd also glimpsed possibilities she dared not have dreamed before. Even the consequences of Melissa's attack might prove catalytic, pushing her to grasp opportunities for which she'd once felt undeserving. With that knowledge, Dorothy drew a deep breath, brushed her fingers over the pinned seam of her dress, and opened the door to her modest apartment. The night had exacted a cost, but it had also left her poised for an entirely new chapter. Dorothy woke at dawn to the muffled sounds of traffic on the street below. For a moment, her mind was blissfully blank. Then the weight of the previous night came rushing back. She recalled the adrenaline, the confrontation with Melissa, and the humiliating tear in her cherished creation. Her muscles tensed involuntarily, as though bracing for another attack. She pushed herself upright, glancing around her humble living room where sketches, rolls of fabric, and her trusty sewing machine lay scattered like an aftermath of creative storms. A meager ray of early sunlight revealed the red satin gown draped over a chair, pinned at the shoulder where she'd made that emergency repair. In the hazy dawn, it looked more symbolic than ever, a testament to her perseverance. A buzz from her phone startled her. She fumbled to retrieve it from the coffee table. The screen brimmed with notifications, texts from acquaintances, emails from curious journalists, and social media messages. Tentatively, Dorothy scrolled through. Each mention of town receptionist in red or Dorothy Anderson design pounded her heart faster. She saw candid pictures from the gala, including one capturing the exact moment she'd knelt to pin her torn dress. The post had gone viral overnight, with captions about determination and poise under fire. A warmth spread through her chest, mingled with disbelief. She had become a sensation, however modest, in a single evening. Some commenters praised her bravery and skill. Others criticized the spectacle, claiming it was staged for attention. Dorothy's emotions seesawed between elation and vulnerability. Fame, even in its smallest glimmer, felt like walking a tightrope. She set the phone aside, taking a moment to center herself. A knock on her front door pulled her from her thoughts. Sarah Martinez, her bubbly neighbor and closest friend, strode in bearing a plastic bag of baked goods. "I figured you might need a pick-me-up," Sarah exclaimed, setting the bag on the kitchen counter. "I saw the pictures online. Dorothy, everyone is talking about it. About you." Her eyes glowed with excitement, though her tone turned gentle. "How are you feeling?" Dorothy pressed her lips into a rueful smile, relieved that Melissa's attempt to smear me didn't succeed, but also overwhelmed. "I never expected this kind of attention." She glanced at the gown, now a silent witness to the harrowing night. "Part of me wants to celebrate. The other part just wants to crawl under the covers and hide." Sarah patted Dorothy's shoulder. You deserve to embrace this moment. You worked so hard, but I get it. It's scary to have so many eyes on you. She began unpacking the pastries, offering Dorothy a warm croissant. The smell of fresh butter and dough reminded Dorothy that she hadn't eaten since the late hours of the gala. She tore off a flaky bite, trying to ground herself in the ordinary act of breakfast. As they ate, Sarah glanced at Dorothy's phone, its screen lighting up with more notifications. I'm guessing you'll need to figure out your next steps. Are you going to keep working at Preston Enterprises or pivot fully into fashion? Dorothy sighed. That question had lurked on the edges of her mind for months, but it now loomed larger. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants to launch my own line, especially with people like Anna Chen offering investment. But I'm also aware that starting a brand is risky. Plus, I owe a lot to Logan. Sarah nodded in understanding. He did give you this chance, but he also wants what's best for you. If he cares about you as much as it seems, I bet he'd support your dreams, even if it takes you away from the reception desk. Her friend's words echoed Dorothy's own private hopes. Yet there was a moral weight to the decision. Loyalty, gratitude, and her future all intertwined. Midway through their conversation, Dorothy's phone rang with a familiar caller ID, Aunt Eleanor. With a bracing breath, Dorothy answered, half expecting a barrage of disapproval. Instead, her aunt's voice was surprisingly soft. I saw the news about you, she began. You were on the television this morning. Can you believe that? My friend said, isn't that your niece from Ohio? And I told her, yes, it is. Emotions welled in Dorothy's throat. Oh, Aunt Eleanor, I'm sorry I didn't call sooner. She wasn't sure what to say next, but her aunt pressed on, a hint of pride creeping in. I never wanted you to get hurt in that city, but seeing you on that stage, standing your ground, maybe I worried for nothing. Your mother would be... She'd be proud, Dorothy. Tears threatened to slip from Dorothy's eyes at those words. She mumbled a choked, thank you. Realizing this was the closest to approval her aunt had ever given, they spoke briefly, and the call ended with her aunt promising to visit soon. The moment was bittersweet, a gentle mending of a strained relationship. When Dorothy hung up, Sarah squeezed her hand. See, people see you differently now, including your aunt, but the biggest change is happening inside you. You're not the same shy receptionist I met years ago. Dorothy nodded, cheeks damp with grateful tears. The transformation was more than a viral moment. It was an inner awakening. She had dared to show the world her creativity and found that, while frightening, it was also liberating. In that hushed sunrise moment, Dorothy sensed that her life would never again be defined by invisibility or unfulfilled dreams. She recognized, with both excitement and trepidation, that she was on a path towards something bigger, something she'd always carried in her heart, waiting for the courage to manifest. The metamorphosis wasn't just about new prospects in fashion, it was a reclamation of her self-worth, a vow to honor her talents openly. And no torn seam or vindictive rival could take that away from her now. After Sarah left, Dorothy busied herself organizing the scattered patterns and remnants of fabric strewn across her living area. She paused occasionally to regard the red gown on the chair, vowing to restore it properly once she had the chance. After that emotional phone call with Aunt Eleanor and all the online buzz, Dorothy felt an odd, exhilarating calm, like a long-held weight had lifted, replaced by a sense of clear purpose. It was nearly noon when her phone chimed again. This time, it was Logan. "How are you holding up?" he asked, genuine concern evident in his voice. Dorothy replied that she was coping, though the previous night still felt surreal. He then mentioned wanting to speak with her about her role at Preston Enterprises. Could she come by the office? Dorothy's heart quickened. Was he about to fire her, concerned that her new notoriety would distract from her duties? Or perhaps he wanted to formalize her success in some way. Either possibility seemed nerve-wracking, but she agreed to meet him that afternoon. She spent a few extra minutes choosing an outfit that felt true to her evolving identity, still professional, yet with a subtle flair she'd not dared display before. She opted for a charcoal pencil skirt and a soft blouse with delicate embroidery at the collar, pairing it with low heels. Nothing flashy, but undeniably more expressive than her usual uniform. Stepping into Preston Enterprises felt different this time. Colleagues stopped to greet her with curious smiles or sly winks. One junior assistant even offered a thumbs up, whispering, "Loved the pictures, Dorothy," as she passed. She blushed slightly, recalling how invisible she had been mere weeks ago. Reaching Logan's office, she found him seated behind a sleek wooden desk, the skyline of Manhattan glimmering through massive windows. He stood up with a welcoming smile. "Thanks for coming," he said, gesturing for her to sit on a plush leather chair. Dorothy perched there, bracing for whatever came next. "I've been thinking a lot about your future," Logan began, leaning against his desk with his arms crossed casually. "Last night, well, it certainly showed everyone what you're capable of, and to be frank, it made me reflect on whether we're fully utilizing your talents here." Dorothy swallowed, her hands clasped in her lap. She had to remind herself to breathe. "I'm grateful for everything, especially the chance to prove myself," she said tentatively. A small smile curved Logan's lips. "You've proved yourself beyond any doubt, Dorothy. It's me who should be thanking you. For your dedication as a receptionist, sure, but also for reminding me that this company can nurture more than just typical corporate roles." He took a measured pause. "I'd like to offer you an in-house position to develop a small fashion studio on the 15th floor. It's a space we've never fully utilized. We can fund your materials, provide resources, and you can work on your designs there. Think of it as a Preston Enterprises incubator." Dorothy's pulse fluttered. An in-house studio, sponsored by the company. It sounded like a dream. She imagined an airy room, filled with mannequins and textiles, all under Preston Enterprises' supportive umbrella. But another thought intruded. Independence. Was this truly the best path for her growth? Or would it tie her even more tightly to her role here? She took a breath, choosing her words carefully. "Logan, that's incredibly generous. But if I accept, would it mean giving up my chance to establish my own label? On my terms?" She voiced the question gently, not wanting to seem ungrateful. "I've been thinking about the offers I got at the Gala, like from Anna Chen. I might want to branch out completely." Her voice quivered slightly at the confession, but she pressed on. "I'm not sure I should stay tied to the company." For a moment, Logan's expression flickered with disappointment, but he quickly composed himself. "I see," he murmured. "I won't pretend I don't want you to stay, but I understand your perspective. Truly, starting your own brand could give you the creative freedom you've dreamed of." Relief and guilt warred within Dorothy's chest. She found herself longing to say yes to Logan's offer. She pictured how safe it would be, designing under the protective wing of Preston Enterprises. Yet she also recalled Olivia Bennett's advice about forging her unique signature, and Anna Chen's offer of investment hung tantalizingly in her mind. If she wanted to stand on her own 2 feet, relying solely on her talent, then striking out independently might be the only way. Logan's gaze softened. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But let me leave the offer on the table for a week or 2. There's no rush," Dorothy nodded, gratitude spilling over. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll think carefully." They stood there, a quiet tension simmering in the air, both professional and personal. Dorothy realized that, at some level, her decision would also affect the unspoken bond growing between them. If she chose independence, Would it drive them apart? The notion was as daunting as it was exhilarating. Finally, Logan nodded toward the door, managing a small, warm smile. "Take all the time you need." Dorothy stood to leave, but just before stepping out, she turned to him once more. "Logan, about Melissa." He waved a hand dismissively. "We're handling the aftermath. She won't be returning to the company." His eyes flashed with a tinge of regret. "I should have removed her sooner." Dorothy accepted that explanation in silence, stepping into the corridor with her head spinning. The choice before her now wasn't just about a job, it was about the very future she had long dreamed of. And as she walked past the reception desk she had once manned, Dorothy felt an invisible threshold beneath her feet. She was no longer the silent observer of life's grand parade. She was center stage, faced with a monumental decision that would chart the course of her destiny. The weekend arrived, bringing with it a swirl of excited energy. Dorothy found herself invited to a small private gathering hosted by Olivia Bennett at her boutique studio in Soho. Word had traveled quickly about Dorothy's dramatic debut at the Gala, and Olivia had arranged an informal showcase of emerging designers. Just a cozy get-together, she'd promised. In reality, Dorothy suspected it was a strategic introduction to potential collaborators and investors. Nerves fluttered in Dorothy's stomach as she arrived in a cab, clutching a garment bag containing a revised version of her red gown. She had spent late nights meticulously repairing and even enhancing the torn seam, determined to show the world a dress that was stronger and more detailed than before. Eleanor Chen had come by to help, offering quiet advice on how to restructure the shoulder so the fix looked intentional. Dorothy had also added subtle beading to accentuate the lines, a final flourish she'd once been too timid to attempt. Olivia's studio was small but stylish, all polished concrete floors and exposed brick walls. A half-dozen mannequins showcased vibrant pieces from upcoming designers, each representing a unique voice in fashion. Dorothy recognized a couple of them from social media, a bright, floral-inspired line from a young Brooklyn artist and a minimalist collection by a recent Parsons graduate. She felt a pinch of intimidation, but also genuine excitement to stand among them. "Dorothy!" Olivia beckoned her from across the room. "Come, let me introduce you." Soon, Dorothy found herself in conversation with a handful of potential mentors and buyers, some representing boutiques, others with deep ties to the garment district. She unveiled her repaired gown, carefully slipping it onto a mannequin. Gasps of appreciation rippled through the small audience. They admired the architectural pleats, the delicate beadwork, and especially the tasteful patching of the once-torn shoulder. Rather than hide the flaw, Dorothy had transformed it into a subtle statement of resilience. Amid the flurry of compliments, Dorothy felt an unexpectedly calm confidence settle over her. The hush of an onlooker's gasp, the quiet scrutiny of a buyer's measured nod. These were the accolades she had yearned for, always from a distance. And now here she was, fully present, no longer plagued by the paralyzing doubt she once carried like a shield. At one point, Anna Chen entered the studio, greeting Olivia with a friendly embrace. Spotting Dorothy, she came over, her warm smile a reassuring sight. "I see you've improved the design even further," Anna noted, gently touching the beading on the shoulder. "You're resourceful and fearless, it seems." Dorothy blushed, but met Anna's gaze without flinching. "I just couldn't let one bad moment define the piece. I wanted it to reflect hope, not ruin." Anna nodded thoughtfully. "When I invest, I look for determination as much as raw skill, because no matter how talented an artist is, obstacles are inevitable. You've shown you can adapt and excel under pressure." Dorothy swallowed, thinking of Logan's offer and her own indecision. She remembered the thrill she felt that night, receiving Anna's card. This could be her path if she chose it, building a brand on her own terms, guided by an experienced backer who believed in her potential. "Let's talk soon," Anna said, sensing Dorothy's unspoken turmoil. "Whenever you're ready to map out your future." Dorothy agreed, feeling a rush of gratitude. This was victory of a sort, the freedom to choose how she would move forward rather than being constrained by fear or circumstance. As the gathering wound down, Olivia congratulated Dorothy on her piece, hinting at a possible collaboration. The host's words filled Dorothy with an almost heady sense of accomplishment. After so many years spent dreaming by herself in a cramped apartment, she was finally in conversation with people who could turn her designs into a reality. And the best part was that she hadn't compromised her integrity or hidden behind anonymity. She had faced sabotage, heartbreak, and public scrutiny, yet emerged with her dignity intact. When the last few guests trickled out, Dorothy lingered a moment longer in the studio's cozy glow. She ran her fingertips along the curve of her gown sleeve, recalling every stitch, every moment of doubt, and every spark of hope. It felt like both an ending and a beginning, a triumph over the old Dorothy, who had feared stepping into the light, and the birth of a new Dorothy, unafraid to claim her place. Stepping outside onto the quiet Soho street, she paused to take in the evening air. The city pulsed softly around her, street lamps, distant car horns, the mingled scents of late-night food vendors. She could almost imagine her younger self, wide-eyed and hesitant, watching from a distant corner. But that girl no longer existed. In her place stood a woman on the precipice of something extraordinary. A soft vibration from her phone interrupted the reverie. It was a text from Logan. "Thinking of you. Hope tonight was a success. Let's talk soon." Dorothy smiled, typing a quick reply. "It went great. And yes, let's." She slipped the phone back into her purse, heart buoyed by the promise of a deeper conversation. Whatever came next, her own label, a partnership with Anna, or even an in-house studio, she would meet it with a faith in her own capacity she'd never known before. Victory, Dorothy realized, wasn't just about accolades or a perfect gown. It was about shedding the constraints of self-doubt and forging a future defined by courage and imagination. And with the city's lights guiding her way, she walked down the sidewalk feeling, for the first time, truly unstoppable. A cool breeze drifted through Dorothy's new apartment in Brooklyn, carrying with it the faint hum of city traffic. It had been a year since the Metropolitan Gala that had changed her life in ways she never imagined. Gone was the cramped studio with leaky pipes and faulty radiators. In its place stood a modest but bright two-bedroom apartment where one of the rooms had been converted into her dedicated workspace. Rolls of shimmering fabrics leaned against the walls, and several dress forms displayed half-finished garments, capturing her evolution as a designer. Dorothy hovered over her sewing machine, methodically attaching a delicate row of beads to the hem of a midnight blue cocktail dress. Though her space was small, it pulsed with the energy of ongoing creation. Threads, pins, and sketches lay scattered on tables, reminders that her new reality was one defined by fashion rather than front desk duties. She still recalled the morning, some months ago, when she had handed in her formal resignation at Preston Enterprises. It had been both nerve-wracking and liberating, as if stepping off one stage to appear on another, far grander one. Eleanor Chen, Dorothy's former mentor and neighbor, still played a vital role in her journey. Most evenings, she took the short subway ride to Dorothy's new place, dispensing wisdom and lending her skilled hands to the finishing of each garment. While Dorothy had refused Logan's offer of an in-house studio, she had instead forged a path with Anna Chen's investment, building a small but promising label called D. Anderson Designs. Anna had come through on her word, providing resources and contacts that allowed Dorothy to scale her operation without sacrificing her creative independence. One day, over tea, Eleanor had marveled at Dorothy's progress. "So many designs," she said, eyes shining as she ran a critical but approving gaze over the pieces. "You remind me of who I might have become if I dared to push forward instead of choosing safety." Dorothy remembered how those words had lodged in her heart, strengthening her conviction that she was on the right path. She, too, had once considered safety above all else. Now, even amid uncertainty, she felt alive in ways she hadn't before. Still, Dorothy's new life wasn't without hurdles. Juggling the practicalities of a budding label, payroll, supply chain, marketing, was a far cry from simply creating beautiful gowns. Sometimes she longed for the steadiness of her receptionist days, when clocking out meant leaving her responsibilities behind. Now her workday stretched into late nights, and her mind buzzed constantly with design ideas or budgetary concerns. She found solace in daily phone calls with Sarah Martinez, her lifelong friend who remained the voice of positivity and common sense. "You've got to pace yourself, Dorothy," Sarah would warn, concerned about Dorothy's perpetual exhaustion. "You can't inspire others if you're burnt out." Dorothy knew Sarah was right, though the pressure to prove her worth often eclipsed all else. She still felt compelled to justify every yard of fabric purchased, every new hire, worried that any mistake might unravel everything she'd built. Dorothy's personal life was equally complex. She and Logan spoke often, sometimes briefly, other times long and late into the night. Their connection had deepened after the gala, but the demands of Dorothy's fledgling business and Logan's high-stakes corporate environment meant they rarely had a quiet evening to themselves. He'd once confided that stepping back from the daily swirl of acquisitions and board meetings felt impossible. She, in turn, understood that building a new brand from the ground up left her little free time for romantic dinners or weekend getaways. There was always the intangible question hovering: would they ever align their worlds enough to truly be together? Notwithstanding the challenges, Dorothy had a milestone to look forward to: her first small collection launch. A press event, organized by Anna, would showcase her designs to a handful of industry insiders and potential buyers. Dorothy had spent weeks perfecting each piece, from flowing evening gowns to structured day dresses that balanced sophistication with comfort. The entire affair was a testament to how her life had transformed. The once invisible receptionist now preparing to stand before cameras and critics, eager to claim her place in the fashion world. In a quiet moment, Dorothy paused her sewing to gaze around her studio. A wave of gratitude washed over her, gratitude for the heartbreaks and confrontations that had propelled her toward authenticity, for the friends who had believed in her, and for the courage she discovered within herself. She picked up a finished gown from a nearby dress form, smoothing its pleats lovingly. This piece, with its subtle lines and vibrant hue, reminded her of the city skyline at dusk, a theme she never tired of exploring. The calendar on the wall showed the upcoming date circled in bold red marker. Her collection launch was mere weeks away. As excitement stirred in her, Dorothy realized that the building she'd yearned for was taking shape with each sketch, each stitch, each late-night burst of determination. The future, though daunting, shimmered with promise. And in this new reality, Dorothy Anderson no longer feared the stage. She welcomed it. 3 nights before Dorothy's collection debut, she boarded a flight back to Ohio. The winter chill clung to the airport tarmac, and she clutched her coat tighter around her as she stepped off the plane. She hadn't visited her hometown since the funeral of her parents years ago, when heartbreak and longing had driven her to New York. This time, she arrived with a different weight, equal parts nostalgia and hope. Aunt Eleanor was waiting at the arrivals gate. Dorothy felt a twinge of apprehension, but her aunt's eyes brimmed with warmth as she pulled Dorothy into a firm hug. "Look at you," Aunt Eleanor marveled, surveying Dorothy's sleek boots and tailored coat. "You look like you walked out of a magazine." Dorothy blushed, remembering how her aunt had once criticized her for chasing impossible dreams in Manhattan. Now, though, a newfound pride softened Eleanor's usual sternness. During the drive through winding country roads, Dorothy noticed how little had changed. The same houses dotted the landscape, the same fields stretched out in quiet expanse. Only the local gas station seemed to have updated its signage. A pang of longing struck her as she recalled her childhood dreams, sketching dresses on the back porch, imagining an escape to the glittering lights of New York. It was strange to return as someone living that dream, though not without struggle. Her aunt's modest home felt instantly familiar. Crocheted blankets, family photos, the scent of warm biscuits drifting from the kitchen. Dorothy dropped her luggage in her old bedroom, the walls still painted a gentle lavender. After a light supper, Aunt Eleanor excused herself to finish some knitting, leaving Dorothy to wander the house. She paused at a framed photo of her parents, smiling beneath an oak tree. A rush of memories surfaced. Her mother gently praising Dorothy's earliest dress sketches, her father encouraging her to embrace her creativity. She retrieved her phone and snapped a picture of the framed photograph, intending to share it on social media as a quiet tribute to her roots. Just then, Aunt Eleanor stepped in behind her. "They'd be so proud of you," her aunt said softly. Dorothy nodded, tears pinching the corners of her eyes. "I hope so. Sometimes I wish I could see their reaction to everything that's happened." In the morning, Dorothy ventured into town to visit the cemetery. Dressed in a simple wool coat, she walked a narrow path among the headstones until she reached her parents' resting place. The cold wind stung her cheeks as she knelt, feeling an odd mix of loss and gratitude. "I did it," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'm still doing it, forging a career in fashion." She wiped her face with the back of her glove. "I just wanted you to know." Later that day, Aunt Eleanor accompanied her on a quick trip to the local diner for lunch. Neighbors recognized Dorothy, greeting her with excitement and curiosity. Word had traveled that she was making waves in the big city. Some asked about her designs, while others simply offered a hearty, "We're proud of you." Dorothy was touched by their unassuming support. It reminded her that even though she had once felt stifled by small-town life, these were also the people who had cheered quietly from the sidelines. That evening, sitting in the living room with the fireplace crackling, Aunt Eleanor surprised Dorothy by placing a neatly wrapped parcel in her lap. "I've been meaning to give this to you," she said. "I found it while cleaning out some old boxes. It's your mother's sewing journal. She kept notes on everything, fabrics, patterns, even color swatches." Dorothy carefully unwrapped the parcel, revealing a worn, spiral notebook filled with her mother's neat handwriting. Pages described classic stitching techniques, design inspirations from local flora, even sketches of rudimentary gowns that never materialized. As Dorothy flipped through it, she felt her mother's presence acutely, as though bridging time and loss through the pen strokes. "I had no idea she was so detailed," Dorothy murmured. Eleanor smiled, the gentle lines in her face reflecting her own memories. "Your mother was practical, but she had a creative soul. A lot like you." The words ignited a spark of connection Dorothy hadn't fully recognized before, a sense that her passion for design was a legacy passed down through generations. On her final morning in Ohio, Dorothy rose early to take a walk among the frost-laden fields behind her aunt's house. The horizon stretched out, a canvas of soft pink and orange. She inhaled the crisp air, letting it steady her. Returning home had been more than a courtesy visit. It was a conscious act of reconciling the girl she once was with the woman she had become. The shy teenager, dreaming of runways and city lights, had returned, transformed, ready to stand on bigger stages, yet anchored by the love and memory of where she began. With her mother's sewing journal safely tucked in her carry-on, Dorothy boarded her flight back to New York. The farmland receded into the distance, replaced by clouds and blue sky. She felt lighter, unburdened by lingering guilt or unspoken farewells. Now, with renewed determination, she resolved to pour this sense of homecoming into her designs. The runway of her future beckoned, and Dorothy was finally at peace with her past. Dorothy's collection launch took place on a crisp fall morning in a refurbished warehouse in Manhattan's garment district. Large windows flooded the space with natural light, illuminating racks of Dorothy's designs arranged along one side. A modest stage and a row of folding chairs comprised the seating area, where buyers, fashion writers, and a handful of supportive friends would soon gather. Though it was a small affair compared to mainstream fashion shows, the intimacy suited Dorothy perfectly. It felt both professional and personal, a culmination of her journey thus far. Eleanor Chen stood at a sewing station off to the side, meticulously pressing last-minute creases from a Merlot-colored evening gown. Sarah Martinez bustled around with bottled water and snacks, ensuring guests felt welcome. Dorothy tried to ignore the nervous tremor in her hands as she flipped through her note cards, prepared to give a brief opening speech. Anna Chen was expected any minute, likely bringing a few key industry connections. As if on cue, Anna arrived in a sleek pantsuit, accompanied by 2 boutique owners and a critic from a local style magazine. They greeted Dorothy warmly, the tension in her chest easing a fraction. "The place looks great," Anna remarked. "I can't wait to see the collection." Dorothy smiled, feeling gratitude swell. She remembered the many late-night phone calls, the near-panicked moments when bills loomed, and Anna's unflappable composure throughout it all. Guests trickled in, among them Richard Hamilton and Olivia Bennet from the Gala. Even Logan Preston slipped quietly through the door, standing near the back with a subdued smile. Dorothy spotted him immediately, tall and self-assured, scanning the space with genuine admiration. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. In that moment, Dorothy felt a surge of warmth, recalling all the ways Logan had quietly supported her dreams. When it was time to begin, Dorothy stepped onto the small platform, heart thudding. The onlookers hushed, and she launched into a concise introduction. She spoke of her background without delving into the painful details, just enough to convey her passion for design. Then, at her signal, the models began to emerge. Some were professionals, but many were friends volunteering to help. The garments spanned from tailored day dresses to fluid evening gowns, each piece bearing a subtle nod to cityscapes. Clean lines, geometric pleats, or metallic accents reminiscent of skyscraper reflections. Applause rippled after each showcase, fueling Dorothy's excitement. She noticed the boutique owners scribbling notes, leaning in to whisper their impressions. The critic nodded thoughtfully, occasionally snapping photos on her phone. At the back, Logan watched, arms folded, a proud glimmer in his eyes that bolstered Dorothy's confidence in a way she couldn't fully explain. During the finale, Dorothy unveiled a reimagined version of her now famous red gala gown, this time in a deep emerald hue with improved structure and an embroidered motif along the waist. Stepping forward, she described how the piece represented resilience. The small group erupted into enthusiastic clapping. Dorothy felt like she might float off the platform, buoyed by the acceptance she once believed was unattainable. The presentations concluded, and attendees mingled around the racks. Dorothy fielded questions about fabric sourcing, custom orders, and shipping timelines. She even scheduled follow-up meetings with 2 boutique owners who wanted to carry her designs for the upcoming season. It was a surreal validation, overshadowing the anxious nights she had spent doubting her place in the industry. Amid the bustle, Logan made his way toward her. "Congratulations," he said softly, just loud enough for her to hear above the chatter. His gaze flicked to the racks of garments behind her. "They're beautiful. You've come so far." A gentle flush warmed Dorothy's cheeks. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without your help," she replied, remembering his quiet generosity at countless junctures. Before they could say more, Anna and Sarah beckoned Dorothy to meet a journalist eager to conduct a quick interview. She turned to Logan with an apologetic smile, placing a hand on his arm. "I'll be right back." He nodded, stepping aside gracefully. As Dorothy walked away, she felt a renewed pang. There was an unspoken bond between them that she had yet to fully explore. But the show demanded her attention now. Love could wait, at least for a moment. In the swirl of congratulatory remarks, camera flashes, and lively conversation, Dorothy caught sight of a quiet figure near the entrance. Melissa Thornhill stood half-hidden behind a pillar, her expression unreadable. Dorothy's breath hitched. She hadn't expected to see Melissa again, let alone here. Was she a reluctant guest, a remorseful onlooker, or a saboteur in waiting? Their eyes met fleetingly, and Dorothy felt an odd stab of compassion. Perhaps adversity had changed Melissa too. Before Dorothy could approach her, a new wave of buyers arrived, pulling Dorothy's focus. By the time she glanced back, Melissa had slipped out. The incident left Dorothy wondering if redemption or second chances might extend even to someone who once tried to ruin her. The day, however, belonged to new beginnings. Surrounded by colleagues, friends, and the press, Dorothy sensed that her collection launch was more than a business triumph. It was a shared legacy, built from the threads of her own past and the unwavering faith of those who believed in her. In that unity, Dorothy found a sense of completeness, as though she had finally stepped into the life she was always meant to live. 2 weeks after her successful collection launch, Dorothy found herself pacing the marble floors of the Metropolitan Museum once again. This time, it was for a special collaborative event, a partnership between D. Anderson Designs and Preston Enterprises, aimed at supporting emerging female designers from underprivileged backgrounds. The synergy of a philanthropic cause with fashion felt like the perfect blend of Logan's charitable vision and Dorothy's creative spirit. The museum's soaring hall greeted her with a rush of memories. The hush of the crowd, the flash of cameras, the sting of sabotage on that unforgettable night. But now, the space was repurposed into an uplifting celebration. Displays highlighted the work of new designers, each granted a small grant from a Preston Enterprises fund. Dorothy's red gown, meticulously restored, stood at the center as a symbolic piece, bearing the tiny embroidered repairs that had become part of its legend. Eleanor Chen and Sarah Martinez arrived early, admiring the museum's arrangement. Anna Chen mingled near the entrance, greeting potential donors and journalists. Dorothy herself was scheduled to speak briefly about her journey from anonymous receptionist to recognized designer, hoping to inspire those at the start of a similar path. She felt a swirl of nerves, but mostly excitement. This event encapsulated the ideals she valued: mentorship, creativity, and the power of perseverance. As attendees filtered in, Dorothy glimpsed a familiar figure slipping through the doors: Melissa Thornhill. Uncertain if this was a sign of further trouble or a search for closure, Dorothy watched her from a distance. Melissa lingered by an exhibit, running her fingertips over the edges of an informational plaque. She appeared hesitant, like someone on the outside looking in. Dorothy inhaled deeply, recalling the final moments when Melissa had torn her gown at the gala. Despite the anger she had felt, Dorothy also remembered glimpsing the desperation in Melissa's eyes. Perhaps that flash of regret had been genuine, Summoning her courage, Dorothy approached. "Melissa," she said quietly, stopping a few steps away. Melissa turned, the tension in her stance telling. "Dorothy," she acknowledged. Her voice was subdued, lacking its former venom. An uncomfortable pause stretched. Finally, Melissa spoke again, eyes lowered. "I came to see what you've done here. I heard about this collaboration and wanted to see it for myself." Dorothy nodded, swallowing the residual resentment lodged in her throat. "It's a cause I care about, helping women who might be overlooked, giving them a chance to showcase their talents." Melissa studied the exhibits, a flicker of longing crossing her features. "I'd have never guessed you'd end up, well, such a success." She paused, then exhaled a quiet sigh. "I owe you an apology." "I behaved terribly." The words softened Dorothy's guarded stance. "It was a difficult time for both of us," she offered, meeting Melissa's gaze. "I'm not justifying what you did, but I can see we were both under pressures we didn't fully understand." Melissa's lips trembled slightly. "I lost sight of who I was. My career, my relationship with Logan. When those things slipped away, I lashed out at anyone I perceived as a threat." The sincerity of the confession caught Dorothy off guard. She recalled how months earlier she had yearned for an apology that never seemed likely to arrive. Now, confronted with Melissa's contrition, Dorothy felt an unfamiliar warmth in her chest. "We can't undo the past," she said gently, "but we can move forward with more compassion. If you want to be part of this initiative, I can introduce you to some of the emerging designers we're mentoring." A spark lit in Melissa's eyes, a cautious hope. "That would be nice. Thank you." Their conversation ended as Dorothy was called to the front, where a small podium awaited her. She parted from Melissa with a slight smile. The tension between them finally thawed. Standing behind the podium, Dorothy surveyed the gathered crowd, investors, designers, media, and philanthropic supporters. She spotted Logan near the front, nodding in encouragement. The memory of their journey drifted through her mind, from spilled coffee at a corporate desk to the swirl of the gala's red carpet. Now they stood side by side, not just as two individuals, but as partners in a broader mission. Clearing her throat, Dorothy began her speech. She spoke of humble starts, chasing dreams in a tiny apartment, and overcoming self-doubt. She thanked the mentors and allies who had bolstered her when she was invisible. She acknowledged the setbacks, tears, sabotage, heartbreak that had shaped her into a stronger designer and a more empathetic person. Her words, though simple, resonated in the hushed hall, carried by the spirit of the museum's grandeur. When she finished, applause echoed, bouncing off the marble columns. Dorothy stepped down, heart pounding. Logan greeted her with a broad smile. "Brilliant," he said, offering his hand. She took it, warmth flowing between them. No longer were they simply boss and receptionist, or even benefactor and designer. Their relationship had matured into a bond of mutual respect and genuine affection. In the final moments of the event, as the crowd admired displays and exchanged contact information, Dorothy and Logan found a quieter corner. He leaned in, voice tinged with tenderness. "I'd like us to do more than collaborate on philanthropic projects," he admitted. "I'd like us to really try, beyond work, beyond these events." Dorothy felt her pulse quicken, a wave of emotion surging. "I want that too," she whispered, meeting his gaze head-on. No cameras, no gossip, just two people forging a future together. It might be messy at times. He was a CEO juggling massive responsibilities, and she was an ambitious designer building her brand. But in that moment, Dorothy sensed that all the heartbreak and triumph had led them here. Together, they stepped into the museum's grand corridor, savoring the final hush of the evening. Their worlds, once distant and mismatched, had merged in a tapestry of challenges, triumphs, and bittersweet lessons. As they walked under the gilded arches, Dorothy felt tears prick at the edges of her eyes, tears of gratitude and relief, mingled with hope for what lay ahead. Hand in hand with Logan, she realized she had found not just a new career, but a deeper sense of belonging, redemption, and love. And that, she knew with unwavering certainty, was a transformation she would carry for the rest of her life. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.